and the scene starts back to a memory in a tavern where some guy is laughing his head off, asking if the lizard summoner really started a delivery business. Our protagonist, Jay, just sits there trying to eat his meal while a bunch of rowdy dudes crowd around his table to mock him, making one guy bring up the rumor about Jay protecting a merchant from magic birds. The other guys just laugh it off, saying there's no way a low-rank lizard summoner could actually do that. Another guy joins in, jokingly asking if Jay can ship his annoying wife back to her parents' house. Jay tells him that'll cost a lot and the group just loses it, making fun of how she's shaped like a barrel. Suddenly, a girl, Felix, steps up to the table looking pretty annoyed and asks if nobody is actually going to carry the drinks they ordered. She's finally had enough of their trash talk and slams a huge wooden mug onto the table with a loud thud. Felix yells at them, saying, "Q, Jay's dragon is actually cute and isn't just some lizard." Jay tries to get her to chill out, calling her name and starting to explain that he isn't just some basic F-rank guy. The guys just keep laughing, calling Felix an annoying little kid fan. She gets even madder and snaps back that she's actually 17 and they're being super rude. Jay tries to tell her that underage drinking is a bad idea, but she just slides the drink over and says it's for him, leaving him totally confused. Felix gives a little wink, telling Jay she finally made it to D rank thanks to his help as a transporter. She insists on buying him at least one drink to celebrate, and Jay looks at the fancy beer, asking if it's really alright for him to have something this high quality. Felix just waves it off like it's no big deal, saying 800 rin is pocket change to her now. She mentions how good it feels to finally be earning her own money after her family lost everything, and after thanking him again, they clink their mugs together while a cheerful girl named Aisha runs over with her arms up, congratulating Felix on the rank up. She's hyped, telling Felix there are already a bunch of new quests that would be a perfect fit for her. Felix laughs and thanks her friend while Aisha tells them both to make sure they keep using the guild. Turns out this whole cafeteria actually doubles as the local adventurers hub. Jay watches them, thinking about how Aisha is the popular poster girl of the place. He remembers back to when he first met Felix, since she was just a total rookie and one of his early clients. Even now, she still comes to him for advice or just to talk about her adventures with a huge smile on her face. But then, Aisha leans in close to Felix and whispers a question about what the deal is between her and Jay. Felix's face turns bright red and she starts panicking, asking her friend what she's even talking about. Jay just sits back and takes a drink, totally oblivious to the drama. He thinks to himself that if he actually had a younger sister, it would probably feel a lot like this. The vibe in the guild stays noisy and lively as the girls keep chatting, while Jay just enjoys the moment before they have to get back to work. Felix completely loses it, her face turning bright red as she lets out a loud squeal from Aisha's teasing. But the moment gets cut short when someone nearby apologizes for bumping into them. Jay asks if they're okay, and the person asks if he's the guy who handles the transport jobs. Felix and Jay both look down to see who's talking, and they're both pretty surprised to find a tiny girl holding a bunny plushie standing right there. She looks up at Jay and asks again if he's really the transporter everyone talks about. Jay leans in and tells her that's him, then asks the kid if she actually has a job for him to do. She holds out a cute envelope decorated with flowers and a bunny sticker, saying she really needs this delivered to her big brother. So Jay tells her he's got it, but he needs to know where the brother is staying. The girl looks down at her shoes and mentions he's a soldier now. She says he's off where all the other soldiers are, sounding pretty lonely about the whole thing. Jay realizes he might have jumped the gun on taking the job since it means heading to a literal battlefield. He double-checks the names, asking if her brother is Raul and if her name is Nicole. Nicole nods, looking like she's about to cry while she explains her brother only joined the army and left home so they could get some money to live on. Nicole's story is pretty simple. She used to live alone with her brother Raul until he heard the army was recruiting. He ended up giving her all his starting pay before heading off to join the ranks, leaving her behind to look after herself. Even though quest rewards pay better than the army, being an adventurer is way too hard if you aren't at least C rank, which is why Jay figures Raul chose the military path instead. He realizes the guy must be a genuinely good person to sacrifice himself for his sister like that. And as Nicole gives a happy nod, Jay can't help but think about how those soldiers are probably being sent straight to the front lines to fight the Demon King's forces. He looks her in the eye and tells her straight up that he'll deliver anything if the price is right. But he also makes sure she knows he turns jobs down just as fast if the pay is bad. Nicole doesn't blink, telling him she definitely brought enough to cover it. She holds out a handful of small coins, explaining she saved every bit of this herself without touching the money her brother left for her. She looks up at Jay with a serious face, saying she saved it so they can have a massive, delicious feast the day her big brother finally comes home. Felix leans in to check the pile of change and sees that it only adds up to about 300 rin. Felix and Aisha both look pretty worried about the small amount, while Nicole just hugs her bunny plushie tight and whispers that it's her money. Nicole looks up with watery eyes and asks if her savings aren't enough, clutching her plushie tight because Jay asks her if she's really sure about this, which makes the little girl flinch for a second. But she starts nodding her head as fast as she can while handing over the coins. Jay plays along, telling her he can't believe he's getting paid such a huge amount, and he gives her a big smile, saying that since she's offering so much, there's no way he could ever turn her down. Nicole's face lights up and she glows with joy, hugging her bunny. Felix leans in and whispers to Jay that she'll cover the rest of the fee herself if he's actually short on cash. Jay looks at the beer Felix got him and the small pile of coins Nicole worked so hard to save. He takes a drink and thinks to himself that this small change is worth way more to him than a million rin. So, with the request officially accepted, Jay gets to work trying to track down exactly where Raul was stationed within the army. About a week later, they're back at the guild where the receptionist tells Felix that her latest quest is all wrapped up. Aisha tells the group she made sure to walk the little girl all the way back to her house, while Felix lets out a big sigh and admits she was just way too worried to let her go alone. Felix looks at the small, lonely house and can't believe a little kid has been living in a place like this, basically surviving all by herself for the last 6 months. When they get there, an old lady from the neighborhood freaks out and asks Nicole if she really went out alone since it's so dangerous. So Nicole points out that a nice adventurer lady walked her home. The old lady offers to let Nicole stay at her place until Raul finally returns, but the old man next to her immediately yells at her to pipe down. They whisper about how they're already struggling with their own grandkids since their son is off in the army. But they still agree that one more kid wouldn't be a problem, though Nicole insists she's fine since she's a big girl now. She gives a big smile and says that if her big brother finally comes home and she isn't there waiting, he'd probably be really surprised. Back at the guild, H mentions how it's at least a relief that the neighbors are keeping an eye on the kid, but Felix just hopes the brother is actually safe somewhere. Felix looks down for a second before turning her attention back to the task at hand and bringing up Jay's name because Aisha happily announces that Jay actually managed to track down the specific army unit where Raul is currently stationed. And then Jay stands alone in a quiet alleyway, looking out over the city as he prepares to head out on his own. Jay activates a glowing magic circle and calls out to Q. A massive burst of light fills the alleyway as the dragon fully materializes through the smoke. Jay looks at his partner and tells him it's finally time to get to work, but just as he's about to head out, Felix comes running up and yells his name. She looks him right in the eye and insists that she's going with him, though Jay just calls her an idiot and says there's no way he can bring a D-rank adventurer to a place where they might run into the Demon King's army. Felix doesn't back down. She follows him and keeps begging to help, even when Jay reminds her that he's heading straight for the front lines. Felix looks down at the ground, thinking about how badly she wants to see her own family and share her feelings with them. She starts to tear up, saying she knows exactly how painful it is to be separated from the people you love. Jay looks over at her for a second before turning to Q and letting out a long, heavy sigh. He eventually gives in and tells her she can come, as long as she follows his orders exactly, making Felix light up as she thanks him. So that's how they ended up here. Jay and Felix finally make it to the messy front lines of the war, and as they walk up, a tired-looking soldier in a chainmail hood spots them and speaks up. Jay doesn't waste any time and asks if a guy named Raul is around, which completely catches the soldier off guard. The guy starts losing it, yelling at them to get away from the front lines and wondering how they even got there, especially since someone else recognizes them as just a low-rank girl and a summoner. The soldier just sighs, saying this is why low-rankers are such a pain because they don't take the battlefield seriously. He goes on about how this war with the demons has been going for 3 years now. It's way more intense than any regular quest they've ever seen. He points out the wounded guys nearby. I'm explaining that the kingdom is losing territory and small countries are getting wiped out left and right. The soldier tells Jay to go home if he values his life, but Jay just calmly says he's only there to deliver something. Jay promises he'll head out as soon as he's done with his business, and then he turns his attention toward another soldier walking their way, who asks if they're looking for him. Jay and Felix look at the soldier with a mix of nerves and hope. Jay asks if he's Raul, while Felix double-checks if his sister is named Nicole. The soldier looks pretty beat up but nods, confirming he's the guy they're looking for. He looks like he's just glad to still be breathing. Jay hands over the envelope and explains it's from his sister, which leaves Raul looking completely shocked to hear Nicole's name out here. The other soldiers can't believe they flew all the way to the front lines just for a letter, but Jay just shrugs it off as part of the job. The guys crowd around Raul, asking what the letter says, while one of them mentions how jealous he is that someone actually sent Raul mail. Raul's face starts to crumble as he looks at the paper. He tries to say her name, but he's starting to lose it. See, he explains that his 6-year-old sister wrote it, and seeing her messy handwriting asking him to come home because she's lonely just breaks him. The weight of the message hits him hard. Raul stands there sobbing into his hands while everyone else just watches in silence. One of the soldiers sighs and says they won't be going home for a while the other guy mentions the only real way to leave is by dying. It's a grim reminder of their life. They can't just quit the service, and trying to desert would only lead to a serious punishment. Just as the soldier asks Jay to sign the receipt for the delivery, everything goes south when a massive explosion rips through the camp, throwing Jay and Felix back as the ground shakes. Soldiers everywhere start losing it, screaming about an enemy attack and the demon race showing up. Jay and Felix look around at the total mess. The camp is being torn apart by the sudden assault. Smoke covers the ruins of the tents, and then this huge clawed foot steps out of the shadows. A masked demon commander walks out with a whole army of goblins and monsters following behind him. The goblins are all screaming as the demon casters start throwing out dark magic to wreck the place. The leader points his hand forward and yells for his army to trample everyone in their path. It's a total slaughter. Felix is in shock that they actually got hit by a surprise attack like this. And as things get worse, one of the soldiers tells Jay he needs to run since he's just the delivery guy and doesn't belong here. Raul looks completely terrified as he begs Jay to tell Nicole that he was doing just fine. He wants her to know that he is definitely going to make it back home to her, no matter what happens here. Everything is falling apart as the soldiers lose their nerve, screaming that they can't handle this and need to run. The scene is a total bloodbath. Felix and the others can only watch as the enemy starts tearing through them. People are getting ripped apart left and right, and the air is just filled with the sounds of them screaming. Felix realizes they've been surrounded. The goblins somehow got behind them, and now they're totally trapped between the lines. Jay stands there looking at Raul, thinking about how it's a choice between dying right here or finding a way home. Looking down at all the bodies and the mess around them, Jay decides that he's going to make sure Raul is the one who gets back safely. While everyone else is losing their minds and trying to escape the chaos, Jay just stands his ground, completely calm. Raul charges ahead into the fight, but then Jay calls out his name as this massive, blinding light starts to fill the area. Felix stands right in the middle of the mess, watching as the soldiers around her start getting torn apart. The whole line is breaking and Raul is shaking, barely holding onto his sword. He thinks about how he's just a delivery guy and remembers what Jay said about the kid waiting back home. He sees a vision of Nicole holding her doll, telling him he doesn't need to be a hero or risk his life for her. She just wants him back, telling him that being together is enough and begging him not to leave her alone like she is now, which makes Felix look over at Raul with a new look in her eyes. She decides right then that she won't let him die here. Jay stays completely cool while cutting through the chaos, and he calls out Felix's name as he moves toward the center of the fight when this loud, creepy laughing starts coming from the smoke, making everyone stop in their tracks to see what's making that noise. A massive demon boss shows up covered in lightning. It looks down at all of them and says that killing weaklings is actually fun, so the monster tells them to run for their lives so it can enjoy the chase. Everyone starts losing it, screaming at each other to get away. Raul finally breaks. He drops his sword and just sits there in the dirt, saying it's over and they're all going to die. The summoning circle glows bright as Jay steps up, while in the back, Raul is just sitting there in the dirt among all the dead soldiers. He's totally given up, but then Raul looks up and sees Jay through the light. He can barely believe it, asking himself if that's actually the delivery guy who showed up. While he's distracted, the goblins are still out there wrecking everyone. They're literally stepping on people and laughing while the rest of the army tries to run. A massive thud hits the ground and Raul's face goes pale. He's sweating bullets as he realizes there's a dragon standing right in front of him. Jay checks out Q's wings and realizes the little guy is too worn out to take off, so he says they probably won't be flying anymore today. He puts a hand on the dragon and asks if he can at least still run. IQ gives him a quick chirp back, letting him know he's good to go, so Jay tells him it's time to move. Q lets out a loud cry as they charge straight into the mess together. They tear through the goblin lines like they aren't even there. Q tramples them while Jay just slashes everything in his path without slowing down. The demon boss sees them coming and completely loses his cool. He yells out in shock that a human is actually riding a child of Bahamut, and Jay doesn't give him time to think. He launches himself off Q's back, swords out and ready to end things. The demon boss is losing his mind, yelling at Jay to quit acting so tough since he's just a lower life form. But Jay isn't backing down at all. The demon screams at the top of his lungs that he's the one doing the hunting here, and Jay just looks him in the eye while jumping in. He tells the demon he shouldn't look down on humans so much, giving the whole demon race a fair warning. The demon boss just calls him a brat and starts laughing like a maniac while his goblin army moves in. But back on the ground, Raul is totally losing it. He yells out for the delivery guy, but Felix just tells him to relax because everything is under control. She watches the fight, thinking about how Q is one impressive dragon, and she knows that if anyone can handle this mess, it's Jay. Up in the air, IJ grips his sword and says he's just going to cut through everything in his way. He drops like a meteor, slamming his blade down so hard that the entire area just explodes into pieces. The demon boss stands there frozen, while the shockwave from the hit starts tearing right through his lines of goblins, and he barely has time to even act surprised before the fight is over, and he's left standing there without a head. Jay finishes his massive swing and stands there while the demon's head flies off into the air, and the demon's body just stays standing as his mind races, wondering when Jay even jumped or where he came from. The demon's eyes go wide as he fades out, wondering how a low-life D-ranker could do this. But then it finally clicks. He realizes he wasn't fighting some weak kid, but an actual S-class monster. His head hits the ground with a thud, and Jay just reminds him that he was warned. And as Jay walks away, he tells the dying demon that underestimating humans was the only reason he lost. The goblin army sees their boss go down, and they start panicking while Q lets out a roar that sends them running. Meanwhile, Felix has to hold Raul back, since he's completely blown away by what he just saw. I'm calling Jay an insanely strong delivery guy. Jay just gets back to Q and says the boss guy only lost because he was too arrogant. Raul starts geeking out, yelling about how Jay just ignored all that magic and took the guy's head off in one clean shot, and he won't stop talking about how impossible that move was. Felix tells him to chill out since they get it, noticing that Jay is actually looking a bit shy from all the attention. Jay gives Q some pats for a job well done, explaining that he only became a summoner to have an easy life. But since his summon turned out to be a tiny lizard, he had no choice but to work on his other skills to survive, which leaves Raul completely losing it in the background. Raul realizes that sword move Jay used to decapitate the demon was on a whole different level. Meanwhile, Felix is busy cuddling the dragon and wishing she could have seen him as a baby. Jay stands over the messy battlefield, noting that most of the soldiers bailed, while the ones who stayed got totally wiped out. Raul is stressed about finding another squad to report the massacre to the higher-ups, but then he notices Jay kneeling over one of the bodies. Just then, Jay rips something off the fallen soldier and tosses it over, telling Raul to catch. Raul grabs it out of the air while Jay reminds him that he made a promise to make it back alive. And it turns out Jay handed him the military dog tags from the bodies on the ground. Raul stands there looking totally confused, while Jay keeps moving through the field, ripping another set of tags off, and Jay tells him that with these, he can finally go home and fulfill that promise he made. Jay rips the dog tag off the fallen soldier and tells Raul that as far as anyone else is concerned, he died right here on the battlefield. Raul stands there shaking as he looks at his hands, admitting that just a few minutes ago, he actually thought his life was over. He looks down at the dirt as his tears start to fall, thinking about how he just wanted to be there to see the kid grow up, and Raul completely loses it and starts sobbing, saying he really thought he'd never see Nicole again while Felix just watches him with a kind smile. Q lets out a tired little sigh, and Jay gives him some props for putting in a solid day's work. Somewhere in the shadows, something is watching them. He's shocked to see a human hanging out with the child of a Bahamut. Then Jay looks his tiny dragon in the eyes and asks if he really is a legendary Bahamut, while the sun sets over the smoking ruins behind them. Late that night in a quiet little house, a young girl is fast asleep in her bed surrounded by her toys until she suddenly snaps her eyes open in the dark, and Nicole sits there for a second before quietly whispering for her big brother. Nicole peeks out from behind the door with her blanket, looking around and asking if her big brother is finally back. She steps outside into the quiet night to check the hills, but finding no one, she heads back in and pours herself a drink. The little girl gulps down the water, clearly exhausted from waiting up so late. She pulls up a stool and climbs up to reach a jar on the high shelf, when a sudden knock at the door makes her jump. She looks back hopefully and asks if it's her brother out there. Nicole screams for her brother and throws herself into a hug, but Jay is the one standing there, looking a bit surprised by the sudden energy. She realizes it's just the transporter guy and sounds a little let down, but Jay tells her he's just there to give her his report. He explains that he tracked down Raul and delivered the letter, making Nicole's eyes light up with hope. She asks if her big brother was doing okay, and Jay gives her a small smile, telling her the guy was doing great. Nicole asks if he said anything else, then looks down and admits she's lonely. She grabs Jay's shirt, whispering that she really just wants her brother to come home. Nicole looks down with tears in her eyes. She sighs and says there are so many things she wants to tell her brother. Jay gives her a look and says there's actually one more thing, then tells her she should just ask him herself as he opens the door to show Raul standing there in the light. Raul calls out her name and Nicole screams for her big brother. Both of them start losing it and crying the second they see each other. The two of them crash into a huge hug, and Nicole just keeps sobbing his name over and over while they hold on to each other. Raul holds her head and tells her he's finally home, asking his little sister if she's been doing okay while he was gone. Watching from the side, Jay tells Felix he's just really glad the guy made it back. It's a huge relief for everyone. Or Raul looks over while still holding Nicole and thanks Jay and Felix for everything they did to make this happen. Raul tells them no amount of money could ever be enough, but Jay says the job was already paid for. Raul won't drop it though, so Jay finally gives in. He tells the guy he's usually hanging out at the guild canteen over on 2nd Street, and suggests Raul can just buy him a drink sometime, while Felix mentions she just wants to hear how Nicole is doing later on. Raul holds Nicole tight on the porch, yelling out a massive thank you to Jay and Felix for bringing them back together. He's so overwhelmed that he just keeps repeating himself. Since that day, Raul has spent his time telling everyone about the heroes who showed up on the back of a dragon to save him when he was in a really dark place. He talks about how the duo came out of nowhere to change everything, calling Jay the greatest dragon rider anyone has ever seen. Later on, back at the guild, Jay looks confused and asks Aisha if there's really something there waiting for him, and Aisha just grins and teases him, saying the message is from a super cute girl. Jay is completely caught off guard by the news. Felix starts getting flustered and asks if it's some kind of love letter. But H tells her the note is actually addressed to both of them. They all hang out by the counter while H gets it ready, and Jay finally realizes who it might be from. She hands over a cute envelope with a little bunny sticker on it, and Jay notices how nice the letter paper is. It turns out Raul and Nicole are doing great now, finally living a quiet and happy life together out in the suburbs. Jay used to live in this old empty house. It's actually bigger than it looks, and everyone seems pretty happy with it. Since none of the neighbors know Raul used to be a soldier, he and Nicole can finally just live a normal life. It's unlikely anyone will ever find out the truth about his past, so they can just keep enjoying their peace. Back at the guild, Felix is genuinely happy to hear the good news, though the guys in the back are clearly hating on the situation. One of the thugs grumbles about Jay being surrounded by girls, while his buddy just shrugs it off. They start laughing, calling Jay a bottom-tier F-ranker who can only handle tiny cute lizards. Felix fires back, calling them pathetic for talking trash when they can't even get a girl's attention, but Jay tells her to just let it go. Felix leans in close and whispers, asking if Jay is actually an S-rank adventurer. She knows he's got top-tier sword skills and can summon a massive dragon like Bahamut, even though he's technically a basic summoner. She really wants to know why everyone still calls him the lowest-ranked lizard guy in the guild. Felix points out that the job rank system is totally broken for summoners, especially since Jay only got stuck at F rank because people thought he was useless. Aich can't believe it. She knows his sword skills and his summon Q are actually top tier, making the whole situation seem even more ridiculous since nobody else in the guild has actually seen him fight. Because he always rolls solo with just one summon, his real power stays a total secret from the other adventurers around town. Felix lets him know the guild staff is in on the secret, and they've been giving him special treatment behind the scenes. Jay thinks that's probably enough for him, though he still looks a little confused about how deep this goes. Felix gets curious and asks what's up with everyone calling his summon a lizard, which prompts Aich to realize Felix wasn't around for the early days. She explains that Q didn't always look like this. The dragon form everyone sees now is actually an evolved version of what he used to be. Jay mentions this all went down before he and Felix even met, leaving her trying to wrap her head around the idea of a lizard era from a few months back. Back then, Q was just a tiny plain-looking gray lizard that didn't look like much of a threat at all. A group of guys at the tavern used to have a field day with it, telling Jay he had no business calling himself a summoner if that was the best he could do, and they just kept the insults coming. They'd laugh in his face, joking about how the guild only has the most basic bottom-tier jobs for a guy with a pet lizard. But Jay just stood there, taking it all like it was nothing, completely unbothered while the tavern was full of noise. A group of girls at the tavern are totally losing it over Q, squealing about how cute he is and begging the little guy to come closer. Q just sits there in the palm of a hand, looking completely tiny and harmless. One of the girls even tries to show him off to the nearby adventurers, practically shoving the little lizard in their faces. The thugs at the table start yelling at them to keep that thing away from their drinks, but the girls are too busy obsessing over his chubby little legs and big eyes. They can't get over his round belly and how soft he looks, especially once the little guy curls up and falls fast asleep right there. While the girls keep gushing over how perfect he is, the guys nearby just look on with pure annoyance. One of the thugs asks why girls even like a summon that clearly can't fight, but Jay just smiles and tells them they should try raising one themselves. He holds Q close, saying the little guy is the best way to relax after a long day. Since Jay always handles his quests alone, Q was the only real friend he had to keep him going. Jay heads toward the city gates, thinking about how his sword is finally back from the shop. He wants to test it out in the wild, but he can't help thinking that life would be a lot easier if he just let his summons do all the heavy lifting, while Q just hangs out on his shoulder making tiny chirping noises. Jay knows the little guy is just a weak Kyuk species, so he reminds himself that he has to be the one to get stronger if they're both going to survive. He heads deep into the woods, revealing that all his training actually paid off way more than expected since he somehow ended up becoming an S-rank swordsman. He stands over the remains of a slime, and with one quick motion, he slices through another one like it's nothing. He checks his blade and says it's working pretty well, so he decides to find a couple more monsters to practice on. Just as he's looking around, a loud scream echoes from somewhere nearby, and realizing someone is in trouble, Jay tells Q they're moving out. He sprints through the forest toward the noise, where a group of adventurers is getting wrecked by a massive Gigas slime. One guy is already stuck inside the monster's jelly-like body, while his buddy panics, wondering what this thing is, as he tries to slash at it, only to realize his sword won't even cut the surface. The guy trapped inside is losing air and swearing, but things get even worse when the ground starts shaking, and another huge slime slides out from the trees. The adventurers completely lose it, yelling about how there's no way they can handle a second one. Jay steps into the clearing and draws his sword, looking totally calm as he tells the panicking adventurers to get back, because they're just getting in his way. But they aren't convinced at all. One guy spots Q and asks if that's just a lizard, while his buddy yells that an F-rank kid is just going to be a burden and can't possibly win, as he points at his friend drowning inside the monster. He begs Jay to run and find some actual help before his friend ends up dead, but Jay isn't planning on going anywhere. He grips his new sword and agrees that he needs to wrap this up quickly, while the adventurer starts losing it, apologizing for being a jerk earlier and crying for help, even though he's sure a sword won't do a thing against a slime. Jay doesn't let the noise distract him. He figures that as long as his swing is fast enough and creates enough pressure, he can reach the core in a single hit. He lunges forward with a massive strike that cuts right through the center, causing the giant slime to burst into a huge mess of liquid. Jay just stands there like it's no big deal, leaving the adventurers completely stunned. They just stare at him with their mouths open, wondering how he actually managed to cut through that thing, especially since a Giga slime is supposed to be immune to physical hits. Jay just looks at them and points out that they were trying to hit it with swords too. The guy can't believe what he just saw, asking if Jay is really supposed to be an F rank, but Jay just shrugs it off, saying those ranks are just something people made up, which only makes the adventurer more confused about how a summoner can use a sword like that. He tells Jay to forget it and just take his friends to safety, but Jay stands his ground against the massive slime, telling the guys they're clearly no match for this thing and should leave it to him. While someone calls out his name from behind, and Jay looks back to see the guys actually listening, as they pull their friend out of the mess. The guy feels terrible and apologizes for talking trash earlier, finally realizing Jay is the real deal, so they take off running. Jay watches them go before turning his focus back to the monster. But then, Q suddenly starts acting strange, looking all serious like he's trying to help out. And after a bunch of effort, the little dragon actually spits out a tiny spark. Jay stares at him, totally caught off guard by the move, wondering if that was actually fire. He realizes Q was trying to breathe out some kind of black-silver flame, which is a total first. Jay looks down at his partner, thinking about how nothing like this has ever happened before. Jay's hands start glowing with a crazy amount of light, and he realizes it's pure mana coming from Q. Everything starts changing fast as a sharp, armored claw digs into the dirt and a huge wing unfolds, revealing that the little lizard is gone, replaced by a massive dragon covered in dark armor. Jay just stands there with his mouth open, wondering what the hell is even going on right now, thinking there's no way this thing was just a normal lizard this whole time. He always figured Q was just a cute little partner to keep him company, but someone yells out about the dragon while a ball of dark energy starts swirling in the air, as Q charges up a massive, glowing orb of power right in his jaws. The dragon fires a huge blast of black flames that completely wrecks the slime monster. And Jay can only watch as Q leans in to nuzzle him. Jay wonders why his mana is acting so different now, thinking it might be because he never called him back. Jay touches the dragon's face, thinking that just like he learned to use a sword, Q must have been, stacking up his own experience this whole time. Jay asks if it's really him, since he was always just a little pet lizard before. It's wild to see he actually evolved into a dragon, and Q just chirps back, letting Jay know he's still the same partner. Jay realizes he's kept him summoned this whole time, and at this size, the mana drain is getting way too heavy. He tells Q to go back for now, and with a quick flash, the dragon's gone. Jay stands there alone, thinking about how he could never, summon anything else, no matter how hard he tried. He picks up the Giga Slime core from the ground, feeling like he'd totally given up on being a summoner until now. He looks at his gear and starts wondering what summoning actually is. Some people say it's just a pocket dimension for monsters, sort of like storage magic, while others think it's teleportation or even just bringing a spirit to life. Jay stands alone in the woods, thinking about how his summoning magic is still a complete mystery to him. Even though he's the one who made the contract, he's still looking up at the sun through the trees and wondering if Q was really a dragon this whole time. He heads back to the city to report the hunt to H, who can't believe a Giga Slime was lurking in the forest right outside the capital. She looks pretty worried about it, so Jay mentions that the thing probably just drifted in from somewhere else. H thanks him for the heads up and says she'll get a formal warning out to the public, though she feels a bit awkward asking an S-rank adventurer like him for proof of the kill. Jay just tells her not to sweat it, especially since she explains that with other adventurers hanging around, she has to stay professional and check the bag's contents. She thanks him for being easygoing and heads behind the counter with his loot. Jay starts to say something but stops, watching her go until H turns back to ask him a question that's been on her mind. She wants to know why he never tells anyone that he's actually an S-rank adventurer, but Jay just asks if it really bothers her that much. He tells her that people in his position don't usually go around bragging about their rank to everyone, which makes Aisha pout as she complains about how the local thugs keep talking trash about him. Jay just laughs it off, not really caring what they think. Jay keeps it real and says that guys who brag about their rank usually aren't actually that good, which is why Aisha finally gets his point. Jay mentions that if you stay in the game long enough, people find out who you are anyway, so he doesn't see a reason to talk about it since most adventurers don't even last 3 years in this business. He says about 90% of them quit before ever meeting him, and most people who actually knew him back in the day are dead or gone. So Aisha asks if he thinks rookies just don't have the right to know his business. Jay explains he just doesn't want random people trying to use him for his rank, but then Aisha finishes checking the monster cores. She tells him the appraisal is done and he should come check out the reward for the Giga Slime hunt, and she gives him a big smile while telling him he did a great job today. Jay just greets her, but he's a bit confused and asks why she's even over here. Aisha reminds him that even though she's usually at the cafeteria, she's still a full-on guild employee, and she jokes that she'll show up anywhere if she smells a romance starting. Jay just stands there wondering what she's even talking about because nothing like that was happening. Moving on, he looks over the rewards on the table. He realizes that since Q used those black-silver flames, one of the Giga Slimes and its core got completely fried. So Jay thinks about how he wishes the dragon had just told him what he was from the start. He starts wondering if his summoning powers are getting stronger, but he still can't figure out what Q really is. Aisha looks pretty confused by the conversation, so Jay quickly brushes it off and says he was just talking to himself, but then Aisha gives him a wink and a thumbs up, telling them she's always ready to help with romance problems. Jay just tells her that definitely isn't happening, and as he's about to head out, he notices something on the floor. He looks down and sees a small leather case, wondering if it's someone's lost ID, so he picks it up. Aisha thinks it belongs to a guy she just served, while Felix suggests just waiting until he comes back. Jay sees the name ironed inside and notes he doesn't know the guy, but he'll need this for his pay, and he decides he'll return it himself if he can find the owner. Aisha remembers the guy was heading out for a goblin hunt with a group of 3, which helps Jay narrow down where to look. He figures the guy is probably out on the plains, and since he wanted to test some things out with Q away from the city anyway, he tells the girls he'll handle the delivery. All 3 of them get super excited and thank him for being so helpful. Moving on, he makes it out to the wide-open fields far from the castle walls. Once he's alone, he calls out his summon, and Q appears in his big, armored form. Jay's pretty happy to see that the evolution actually stuck even after a new summoning, and Q is just as hyped to be there. He lets out a little chirp and starts nuzzling Jay's face like a big puppy. Jay watches his dragon nuzzle against him and notes that the big guy is in a seriously good mood, especially since Q is finally in his evolved form. Jay places a hand on the dragon's back and asks if he can actually fly with those wings, but Q looks back with total shock, like he just realized the wings were even there. Jay can't believe the dragon didn't even notice them, so he leans in and asks Q if he's ready to try a takeoff. Q gives a confident chirp in response, and suddenly they launch into the air with a massive burst of wind. They tear through the sky together, and before long they're soaring high above the trees. Jay looks out over the hills and the entire valley stretching out for miles, thinking to himself that the feeling of flying is actually incredible. He watches the ground rush by below them while he keeps a sharp eye out for the guy he's supposed to find. After scanning the open plains for a bit, Q lets out a quick chirp to get his attention. Jay looks down and spots a group of small figures in the distance. And it turns out to be three adventurers standing back to back. They're completely surrounded by a massive pack of goblins and look like they're in big trouble. Jay spots the group from the air and shouts that he's found them, though he quickly realizes they're in a bad spot, completely surrounded by monsters. Q lets out a sharp cry as they tuck in and start a steep dive, picking up crazy speed as they fall toward the center of the chaos. Down on the ground, the three adventurers are barely holding their own against the swarm, but a couple of goblins look up and start screeching when they see a massive shadow growing over them. Q slams into the dirt like a meteor, crushing the monsters instantly while Jay stays ready for a fight, leaving the adventurers completely stunned. One of them points and yells that it's a dragon rider, while the others can't believe they actually just got saved. One guy worries about their gear, but his friend tells him to forget it and just run while they have the chance. Jay watches them make a break for it and tells them to just keep going until they're clear of the area. Then he has Q launch back into the sky with a massive burst of wind that clears the field. As they climb, Jay looks toward a nearby ridge and wonders if that's the local den, thinking the group probably just got too close to a nest. Jay rides Q through the air, drawing his bow to thin out the pack as they rip through a goblin, dropping it instantly. He says he'll just scatter the rest of them for now, but then he spots something, standing on the rocks nearby. It's a goblin shaman, a much bigger threat than the others, and Jay wonders if this guy is the boss of the whole pack. Looking at the magic circles forming, he realizes the damage in this area is only this bad because of this one monster, so he decides the shaman is the only one he really needs to take down. The creature starts gathering massive energy, but the shaman fires first. A huge blast of magic slams into the ground right where the adventurers are trying to escape, and the shockwave sends them flying. They both scream as the explosion tears up the path, forcing Jay and Q to bank hard through the smoke. Q lets out a frustrated cry as he tries to retaliate, but only a bit of smoke puffs out of his nose. Jay realizes the little guy probably can't control his fire yet, since he's technically still a baby dragon despite his size, so he just reaches down and pats him on the head, telling him it's okay. Jay thinks it's just a goblin shaman, so he can definitely handle it. He leaps into action as Q stays close by. Everyone watching is caught off guard. One of the survivors groans on the ground, barely holding on while Jay lands hard on the ground right in front of them. The girl looks up in total disbelief as he stands his ground, gripping his sword tight. He swings with everything he's got, creating a massive flash that cuts through the magic, leaving the soldiers completely confused. One of them asks who that guy even is, wondering if he's some kind of lizard summoner because of Q, but the girl is focused on something else. She realizes this guy just used a sword to stop magic, and she can't wrap her head around how he just sliced right through the attack. Jay just stands there calmly while the flames die down around them, and the goblins start losing it and running for their lives. Q takes to the sky, looking like a beast in the light as Jay tells him to go get them. So Q slams down onto a rock like a total boss, sending the remaining goblins flying in every direction. Jay notes that since they lost their leader, the rest of these guys aren't really a threat anymore. He just walks away while the terrified goblins scatter into the hills. Jay finishes cleaning his sword after the battle, but the smell is honestly pretty gross. Q is definitely not feeling it, and lets out a long groan because of the stench. Jay tells him the smell will fade by the time they reach the capital, but Q keeps his distance. Q asks why he can't just hop on his back, but Jay says there's no way he's letting him ride while smelling like that, so he decides to just walk the rest of the way. He looks back to check on the adventurers he rescued, just as Felix calls out, running over with a huge smile to thank him for saving their lives. One of the soldiers explains they were just on a basic goblin hunt when things went south. Jay tells him not to sweat it since that stuff happens, then quickly changes the subject, pulling out the card he found earlier to ask if she recognizes it. He gives her a bit of a lecture, saying she needs to be more careful because losing an ID could get her banned from the guild, which makes her realize she must have dropped it back at the guild hall. Jay looks at the card and realizes the name on it is Ironed. He mentions that if she's the famous red-haired Ironed, she's actually a big deal, leaving her totally impressed by him. Felix stares at Jay with total wonder. She's the daughter of a noble house that lost everything, and seeing him ride a dragon and wreck goblins makes her wonder if he's some kind of high-level monster tamer. Jay sets the record straight, explaining he's actually registered at the guild as a summoner. Felix can't even believe it. She's never seen a dragon actually listen to a human before, and she starts gushing about how they must have been together for a long time. In reality, it's only been a couple of hours since they met, but Felix is so starstruck that she asks if the dragon is still a baby because of its size. Q just stares her down like a weird stone statue, making her super uncomfortable while Jay just watches them. Jay turns his attention back to the soldiers he just rescued, telling them they got lucky to walk away with just minor scratches this time. He doesn't hold back, telling them that amateurs shouldn't be doing reckless stuff they can't handle. The guys look completely embarrassed and immediately start shouting a bunch of excuses, claiming they're veteran adventurers who just had a bad day. They even try to flip it on Jay, calling him a fraud and a lizard summoner. But Jay isn't buying any of it. He points out their gear is just a cheap anti-goblin starter set from the guild shop, and mentions he actually heard them laughing at him behind his back the day he bought his own gear. The two guys start shaking because they know they're caught, and Jay calls them out for being pathetic, saying they were probably just planning to take the girl's money and ditch her the second things got dangerous. Jay stares the guys down, telling them that no matter how many lives they think they have, it won't be enough if they keep being this reckless. He explains to Felix that scammers who target rookies show up all the time in this kingdom. These guys are just beginner adventurers who don't know anything, and Felix is completely shocked to find out they weren't actually veterans. Jay figures she just thought having any help was better than fighting all by herself. He gives her some real talk, suggesting she should form a proper party with other adventurers, instead of just trying to hire people, especially since there's no way to know if someone's skills are actually real when they're just bragging about themselves. It's too dangerous to trust people who just talk a big game, and he points out that a girl her age really shouldn't be traveling with two random middle-aged guys. He warns her she has no idea what they might try to do to her. Jay finishes his lecture, telling her he's given his warning, but before he leaves, he's got one more thing for her. He holds up the severed ear of the goblin shaman. He tells her it's proof of the kill, and she can get a reward for it if she turns it into the guild. Felix takes the trophy but is totally confused about why he's being so generous. She's grateful, but the thing smells so bad it's making her lose it. Jay just tells her to take the reward money and use it to hire some senior adventurers who actually know what they're doing and aren't creeps. Felix stands there staring at the gross goblin ear on the ground. She looks pretty disgusted by the trophy, but it's time to move. Jay hops onto Q's back while Felix follows along, and the whole group starts the long trek across the empty plains, heading straight for the massive walls of the kingdom in the distance. They finally reach the Grenold Kingdom. As the huge castle towers come into view, one of the soldiers turns to Felix and thanks her for helping with his wounds. The soldiers stop in front of a building to say their goodbyes. They tell Jay they're really grateful he showed up when things were looking bad because they honestly didn't think they'd make it out. They both give a big, genuine smile and thank the duo one last time. Jay watches them walk away, he hoping that getting wrecked by those goblins was enough of a lesson to make them actually take their work seriously. Felix just giggles at him as they stand there, mentioning how it feels awesome to have people show some real gratitude. Jay just gives her a look. He thinks it's funny she's this happy, even though those guys were basically scamming her. As they keep walking, Felix suddenly asks if Q is actually a Bahamut child. Jay stops in his tracks, totally caught off guard by the question. She goes on about how Bahamuts are known for being the strongest dragons out there, and she's pretty sure Q looks exactly like the ones she's read about in her books. Jay plays it cool and tells her she's right, but on the inside he's totally losing it. He had no idea his little dragon was actually a legendary Bahamut. Jay thinks about how almost nobody has seen a Bahamut, so the books are mostly just guessing. But looking at Q, he realizes the kid matches the descriptions perfectly, and Felix just stands there staring at him. She's thinking about how he's a nice guy who's insane with a sword, and the fact that he's a dragon summoner makes him even cooler. Back at the guild, H is all smiles as she lets Jay know that Iron got his lost card back, and she makes sure to thank him for taking out that shaman because the appraisal on the shaman's robe and ear is finally done. She tells him he did a great job finding and wrecking a high-level boss during a basic quest. Felix pipes up and tells everyone that Jay handled the entire thing all on his own, making Aisha look at him in total shock. Jay tries to be humble and says Felix actually helped out a ton when they were returning the card, but Aisha is still blown away that he beat 2 high-level monsters in a single day. Felix realizes she's just been using his last name, so Jay tells her his full name is Jay Steldom. Felix starts totally geeking out with sparkles in her eyes, asking the other girls if they had any idea that Jay is actually a dragon summoner. She keeps going on about how he was just shredding through goblins and magic like it was a joke. Aisha just looks at her, trying to process the whole dragon summoner thing. Aisha says they already knew Jay was reliable, but Felix leans over the counter and yells that it's more than that. The guy literally fell from the sky and smashed 2 goblins instantly. Felix keeps hyping Jay up, telling everyone he's so fast with a sword you can't even see it, but Jay just covers her mouth to get her to stop, and H cuts in to hand over the reward, telling Jay he's officially earned 100,000 Karen for the job. Instead of keeping it, Jay just reaches out and places the entire stack of cash right into Felix's hand, causing her to stare down at the money in shock. She can't believe he's just giving it away like that. She looks up at him totally confused, wondering why he's handing over the whole reward. Jay tells her he doesn't really need it since he had some other luck today. He suggests she just uses it for her own travel gear, which makes Felix start shaking with excitement, though she quickly tries to tell him that's not really the point. She reminds him that he was the one who said she should hire a nice senior adventurer to help her out, and she gives him a big wink, holding the money up and saying she's using this cash to hire him as her partner. With the deal seemingly made, Aisha leaves them to it, telling the two of them to take their time. Jay and Felix sit quietly at their table while the tavern hums around them, and Aisha is nearby, absolutely losing it. Her eyes are sparkling like she's watching a scene straight out of a romance novel. One of the other girls asks Aisha why she's so hyped and if her love filter is acting up again. But Aisha just points at the two of them and starts dreaming about how romantic it is for them to be holding hands while a huge stack of cash is involved. The other girl kills the vibe by asking if that's even romantic. She tells Aisha that the two of them aren't actually talking about love at all. Back at the table, Jay clears his throat and tells Felix he's going to be real with her one more time. He crosses his arms and says he doesn't have any plans to start taking care of people, but he points out she's been doing okay on her own anyway. He clarifies that he never actually said he was the guy she should be hiring. He's mostly worried that if she sticks with a lizard summoner like him, people are eventually going to start making fun of her too. Some guys in the back are gossiping about how 100,000 Karn is a huge waste, but Felix doesn't care. She just reminds Jay the money was his to begin with. Felix stands her ground, telling Jay that she's the one who gets to decide how she spends her money. Even tucked away in the back of the room, her looks are still drawing eyes from all over the tavern, and Jay just lets out a tired sigh, muttering that for a girl who looks like her, she sure is a handful. He casually calls her a wild horse, which immediately sets her off. Felix snaps, her eyes sharpening as she prepares to shout back, asking him who exactly he thinks he's calling a tomboy. She swings her hand at him in a fit of rage, but Jay doesn't even blink. He keeps his glass to his lips, catching her wrist with his free hand, like it's the easiest thing in the world. And after taking another sip, he coolly tells her she's about 10 years too early to be trying to land a hit on someone like him. Felix just freezes. The shock of being shut down so easily hits her hard, and her face goes bright red as her eyes start to well up with tears. She turns away, whimpering that not even her own parents or her nanny ever said such mean things to her, while Jay finally starts to realize he might have pushed it a bit too far. She starts crying into her hands, calling him cruel, and suddenly the whole tavern goes dead silent as every guy in the place starts glaring at Jay like he's the bad guy. Jay completely loses his cool and starts waving his hands around in a panic, telling her he's sorry and that he definitely went way over the line. Jay drops into a deep bow right at the table, telling Felix she's totally right and he's sorry. She's still standing there with her head in her hands crying, and Jay is just sweating, scratching his head like he's completely lost. He mutters to himself that he really just doesn't get what's going on, while Felix keeps going, saying she actually suspected she was being played yesterday. She admits those two people seemed so nice to her that she wanted to trust them, but now that she's finally managed to become an adventurer, everything feels like it's falling apart. She looks down, thinking about how whether someone is telling a mean lie or a nice one. She just can't tell the difference anymore and remembers people telling her she'd be fine and to hurry along. She's stuck wondering whose word she's actually supposed to believe at this point. Watching her, Jay realizes there's some really heavy stuff going on in her head. He figures all the pressure and bad vibes she's been dealing with just boiled over because of him. Felix is full-on sobbing now, and Jay is totally panicking. The mood is so heavy he doesn't know what to do and is basically praying for someone to save him. But it turns out things are about to get way worse. Aisha is standing in the back, looking like she's about to snap. She's got this terrifying blank look on her face that makes Jay's blood run cold. He just lets out a scared little noise, knowing he's in huge trouble. Jay claps his hands together to cut through the drama, finally giving in and telling Felix he gets it. He lets out a long sigh and rubs his head, telling her he'll take the job for 100,000, even though he looks completely exhausted by the whole scene. Felix is still sobbing into her hands, but she stops just enough to look up and ask if he's actually being serious. Jay points a finger at her and lays down the law. He says he'll hire her, but only for today, and if she thinks his price is too high, then the deal is off. Just like that, Felix's tears vanish and she's all smiles, telling Jay she's in his care. He just stands there completely weirded out, wondering if she was even crying in the first place. The next morning rolls around and Felix shows up in her full adventurer gear, looking super hyped and telling Jay she's ready to get started. Jay isn't letting her get carried away though. He corrects her immediately, saying it's not starting today, it's only for today. Felix just sighs and tells him he's being way too stubborn. He explains that since they're both using this guild as their home base, they're going to be seeing a lot of each other anyway, so he's strictly only helping her out this one time. The two of them walk over to the quest board to see what's available. Jay asks if she's really an E-rank adventurer, and she tells him she just got the rank. She shows off her gear, explaining that her current skill set covers using a rapier and some basic fire magic, which should be enough for what they need. Felix claims she's just doing basics for now, though she's really trying to act like she'll be a pro in no time, which makes Jay curious, so he asks if she was always this good with a sword and magic. Felix tells him she started learning back at her old house and looks down at her blade, explaining her family actually hired a private tutor to show her the ropes. Jay listens and figures if magic is her main deal, they should find a job that actually plays to her strengths. He looks over the board, mentioning the goblin hunt from yesterday worked out well for her style, but he warns her that if they get swarmed by too many enemies, she won't even have a chance to cast anything. He thinks a training quest is better for now, but Felix isn't having it. She says those are for total rookies and reminds him she worked hard to hit E rank. Now she scans the board and spots something perfect, a one-day gig standing guard for a bridge repair crew. So they head out to the site where a massive stone bridge is being fixed up over a rushing river. The two of them walk down the dirt path, ready to start their first official job together as a team. Felix is sitting on the grass complaining about how bored she is, but Jay just tells her that guard quests are always like this. She looks over and notices a merchant wagon coming down the path, pointing out that someone is finally approaching, and the heavy wagon pulls up near the bridge repair site, while the rest of the crew stays busy with their work. Hidden nearby, someone is watching them, noting there are only 2 guards, and figuring they're just low-rank rookies because of how the girl is dressed. A rough-looking guy watches from the bushes with a mean look on his face, whispering to himself that this is going to be an easy win. Jay suddenly stands up and says it's time to get to work, which catches Felix off guard since she doesn't see anything yet. He explains that there are a bunch of monsters out there along with one guy who seems to be a monster tamer, and right on cue, a pack of kobolds armed with shields and swords come charging out of the dark woods. The people at the bridge start panicking as they see the monsters. Someone yells out that kobolds are attacking them. Felix is totally startled by the sudden jump in action, but Jay tells her to keep her cool and start getting her magic ready. Felix steps up and shouts for a flame shot, sending a massive blast of fire straight into the charging pack, and the explosion hits the kobolds head-on, sending them flying as they let out pained cries from the heat. Felix is pretty hyped and says she actually did it, but Jay tells her to stay focused because there are still more monsters coming. Jay starts running toward the fight and yells for her not to let any of them touch the cargo, which she says she's got covered. While the monsters are still burning from the magic, the merchant nearby is just frozen in place and totally losing it. Jay shouts at the workers to stay calm and find a safe spot, explaining that he and Felix will protect the supplies and gear. He turns to the merchant and tells the guy he needs to move faster. But instead of leaving, the man gets angry and accuses Jay of just wanting to steal everything for himself, which catches Jay completely off guard. Jay can't believe the guy is being so paranoid while Felix is literally over there fighting. So he realizes he has to step things up and decides it's time to use his real power, calling out a summon as a blinding light starts to fill the path. The merchant and his horses completely lose it when they realize a giant dragon is standing right over them. But Jay tells Q to keep moving because there's definitely a tamer nearby controlling all these monsters. He says they're going to find whoever is behind this right now and takes off into the air, leaving the road behind as he spots 3 guys hiding out in the thick bushes just ahead. Jay realizes these guys knew about the bridge repairs and were just waiting for some easy targets, using monsters to do their dirty work. Felix is struggling back at the wagons because these kobolds are way faster than normal, and she can't land a hit. Jay tells Q they need to take out the leader first, spotting the bandit hiding in the grass, and the bandits see them coming and start panicking, yelling for the archers to open fire before they get crushed. Q flies straight through the incoming arrows, which just bounce off his scales like it's nothing, and the bandits are totally shocked. They can't believe how tough the dragon is as Jay closes the gap. Q's massive shadow stretches across the forest floor, passing right over the bandit hiding in the bushes. The tamer starts losing it and screams as a glowing mark appears on his hand, but Jay is already mid-swing, bringing his sword down so hard it takes the guy's arm clean off, sending it flying through the air. The tamer's mark shatters instantly, and back at the road, the kobolds get hit with a blast of fire as the wagons go up in flames. Felix is totally wiped out, leaning over and catching her breath after finally landing a hit. She hears a loud noise and looks over at the bridge, seeing the remaining bandits making a break for it, and shouts that they're running away while a wounded worker struggles to stay upright on the ground. Jay yells down from the sky for Felix to look after the guy. Sigh, and she calls back that she's got him. Meanwhile, the other bandits are laughing in their getaway wagon, talking about how much money their boss had, thinking they're set for life, until Jay and Q drop right onto the wagon and tell them they're done. Q slams his head right into the back of the getaway wagon, and the bandit inside completely loses it, screaming for his boss while Jay just drops down from the sky, hanging off the dragon's leg to tell the guys he's back. Jay hops onto the moving wagon and grabs the reins, quickly getting the horses under control and slowing them down. He drives the cart back toward the bridge and yells out to ask Felix how things are looking on her end. Meanwhile, the injured worker is leaning against the bridge wall, pale, and thinking he just got hit by a stray arrow. The guy starts blaming himself for not listening to the warnings, but Felix kneels down and tells him to just stop talking. Jay walks over and tells the worker to relax, since they got all the cargo back, which finally makes the guy breathe a sigh of relief. And Felix says the wound is bad and they need a doctor fast, so Jay suggests using Q to fly him to the clinic immediately. He ties a bandage tight around the guy's waist and tells Felix to stay behind and keep guarding the bridge, since more bandits might show up after hearing all the noise. Felix just nods and gets ready. Jay and Felix get the injured worker settled onto Q's back so they can rush him to get help. But the guy is barely hanging on, mumbling about how he has to protect the cargo and make some money, because his family is back home waiting for him to return, and he can't let them down. He starts breaking down, crying about how his son is only 5 years old and needs him around. Jay gives him a reassuring smile and tells him it's okay. They're going to take a quick flight, but he'll be home safe. He tells the guy not to worry, and after a quick trip through the air, they get him to the kingdom's clinic. Later on, Jay meets back up with Felix at the bridge. Things stay quiet, and once they get paid, they head back to check on the worker. Felix mentions most days are boring, but Jay says these last 2 days have been a total wreck. So they reach the worker's room and give the door a soft knock. A voice from inside tells them to come on in. They walk in to see the worker sitting up with his wife and son, and he's shocked to see his rescuers again. Felix looks at the worker and says his color is already looking a lot better, and then tells the family that these are the adventurers who saved him. The wife starts crying into a cloth, thanking them for saving her husband's life. Jay just brushes it off, saying it was no big deal, while Felix mentions that he's recovering fast because he got treated so quickly. Just then, the couple's little son starts poking at Jay to get his attention. The kid looks up at him and gives him a huge smile, saying thanks to his new hero, and it's the cutest thing ever. Jay tells him he's welcome, but then the kid reaches out and puts something small into Jay's hand. Jay asks if he's really giving him this seashell and tells the kid it looks great, which makes the little guy's face light up with excitement. And Felix lets the worker know that the foreman is keeping his wagon and cargo safe for him, leaving the guy feeling like he can't thank them enough. So when Jay and Felix try to head out, the worker and his wife both yell for them to wait up. They beg Jay to at least tell them his name so they can pay him back properly for everything he did, but Jay just looks at the seashell the kid gave him and says, "This little gift is already plenty of a reward." Walking through the town together, Felix tells Jay that he's definitely cut out for a job where people actually thank him for his help. Jay asks if she really thinks so, and she just smiles, saying he has a great look on his face right now. So she suggests that since he has Q with him, he could easily work as a transporter. Jay isn't quite sure what she means by that, so Felix explains it's basically a job that helps connect people to one another. She gives him a huge, bright smile and says that living for the sake of others like that is way more wonderful than anything else. And even though it's only been a day since Q's weird transformation and they haven't had much time to process it, Jay starts to realize that maybe this kind of adventuring style isn't such a bad idea after all. Later on, Jay is caught completely off guard when he looks up and sees Felix standing there with a totally serious look on her face. It's pouring rain outside when Jay opens the door and asks her what she's even doing there. Felix gets all red in the face and tells him it's his fault for saying all those things earlier, and then she just starts screaming at the top of her lungs. Because apparently, after the visit last week, someone told this sheltered girl some scary stories about the bad guys in the capital, and now she's totally freaking out. Felix is standing there shaking and crying, saying she has no idea who she can even trust anymore. Jay realizes he might have gone a bit overboard with his stories, and now it's clearly getting to her. So he looks at her soaked boots and asks if she's really been waiting out in the rain since morning just to find someone she can rely on. Felix looks down, quietly saying that isn't the only reason, but she admits she can't really deny that's part of it. Hearing that makes Jay feel like he's definitely the one responsible for her being in this mess. Jay tries to distance himself, explaining that most people just call him a lizard summoner and talk behind his back constantly. He tells her that a girl from a noble family like hers shouldn't be seen with a low-rank adventurer like him, but Felix is just confused about the lizard comment. Our Jay gives her a serious warning that she'll just get mocked by association if she stays, but Felix just tells him to leave her alone, and as she starts walking, she tells him that the people talking trash don't know anything about him or Q. She thinks back to all the times she's seen him in action, helping and saving people, and says that even a beginner like her can tell what kind of guy he really is. Felix looks him right in the eye with a huge smile, telling him that she thinks he's a truly amazing person, leaving Jay standing there completely speechless, just staring back at her. while it all sinks in. Felix looks away, admitting that getting hit with such direct praise makes her pretty bashful. She points out that as a fallen noble, she doesn't really have any dignity left to worry about, but then she just laughs it off, saying she's only joking even if it's basically a fact. Jay stands there looking awkward, thinking that's a pretty heavy joke to try and agree with. Felix giggles about how she managed to fluster him, but Jay has had enough of the dark humor and tells her to knock it off with the fallen noble jokes. Jay watches her walk, realizing he can't exactly let a girl in her position pay for her own meal. He still has the reward money she gave him yesterday, so he catches up and asks her if she wants to grab dinner together again tonight. The question catches Felix completely off guard. She just stands there blushing as red as her hair. She stammers a bit, asking if this is supposed to be like a real invitation for a dinner date. Jay tries to play it cool, saying it's really not that big of a deal, and tells her she's free to turn him down if she's not feeling it. Felix immediately starts shaking her head as fast as she can to show that's not the case. Jay leans in a bit and tells her that if she has a craving for anything specific, he'll find a good spot for them. Felix can barely look at him, just letting out a tiny sound of agreement. She quickly pulls her hood over her face and tells him she'll think about it, but she's so flustered she switches to super formal speech, leaving Jay totally confused. The two of them stand in front of the massive quest board, and Jay starts by reminding her of what he said before, acting like a total pro, as he explains that beginners should really stick to jobs they're 100% sure they can pull off. He's mid-lecture when he notices Felix is just mumbling to herself while browsing the board, completely ignoring his advice, until she mentions there aren't many delivery jobs posted today. Jay's caught off guard, asking if she was actually trying to find a quest for him, instead of looking for herself. He can't help but think she's got her priorities mixed up given her own situation, but seeing her help him out like that makes him realize just how nice of a person she really is. Since she's looking out for him, Jay decides to return the favor and starts scanning the board for a quest that suits her, thinking about how rare it is for someone to do nothing but deliveries for 10 years, making it a weirdly good niche. While they're looking, he overhears some guys at a nearby table whispering about a dragon knight being in town, and they start talking about how this person was seen flying through the sky to save an injured guy, making Jay realize people are already talking. The guys at the table keep talking, and one of them mentions a story about a dragon knight who saved a group of adventurers from a massive goblin horde, making his buddy lose it as the Mohawk guy describes how this hero just dropped from the sky on a dragon, wrecking every goblin in sight with his sword. He swears it's the truth, pointing out the 3 soldiers nearby as the ones who actually saw it happen, which gets his friend even more hyped up, until the Mohawk guy notices Jay watching them. He stands up and aggressively asks the lizard summoner what he's staring at, but Jay just tries to play it off as nothing. The thugs start laughing, and the leader tells Felix she should ditch Jay before she starts smelling like a lizard too. Jay tries to defend his dragon, saying he doesn't smell. Yes, but the guys just ignore him and tell Felix she'll never get any good quests with a guy like that. They try to scout her, bragging about being C rank and saying she should come with them instead. The leader reaches out to grab her shoulder, telling her he'll show her the ropes. But Felix isn't having it. She slaps his hand away instantly, telling him to keep his hands to herself. She looks at them with total disgust, telling them they're the ones who actually stink, and asking if they could just shut their mouths for once. The thugs get heated, with the leader acting like he was just being nice, while his buddy tells her to stop acting like such a brat. Felix gets heated and asks Jay why he's just sitting there not saying anything, but Jay looks pretty over it, telling her that no matter what he says, guys like this are never going to listen to reason. He finally stands up though, telling the thugs they've said enough rude stuff for one day. He makes it clear he doesn't care what they say about him, but he's not going to let them drag his friends into their mess. Jay's eyes go dark as he stares them down, telling them flat out that he already gave them a warning, which actually seems to freak the guys out for a second as they stutter, trying to figure out what his deal is. The thugs try to act tough again, yelling that he's just some lizard-loving loser, while Felix just looks at them with pure disgust and mutters that these guys are actually worse than goblin. The guys start saying some really gross stuff about stripping her and selling her to a slave trader, and while Felix sighs about how she can't trust anyone in this city, Jay realizes that a guild this big is bound to have some total trash members. One of the thugs yells for everyone to just go for it. They all reach for their swords and daggers at the same time, but Jay is way too fast for them. He moves in a total blur, catching them completely off guard before they can even get their weapons out. He gets right in the leader's face, reminding the guy one last time that he already warned him not to push it, and then he just lets loose, landing a massive punch right in the guy's gut that hits with enough force to shake the whole room. The lead thug lets out a weak groan as he completely loses consciousness, his body hitting the floor hard while Jay just stands there. Everyone in the tavern is completely baffled, looking back and forth because the guy just seemed to drop for no reason, leaving Felix standing there totally frozen. Felix wonders if the guy just has some weird illness. So a couple of other dudes start dragging him off to the medical room, while the general consensus is that being a jerk is a disease he'll never get over. Jay tries to brush the whole thing off and keep moving, but he notices Felix is just standing there giving him this intense look. She doesn't say anything at first and just tells him she's heading back over to the quest board to find some actual work. So Jay follows her and apologizes to H for making things awkward with the fight. But H tells him he's got nothing to be sorry for since those guys were the real problem. He still feels kind of bad since he knows his presence usually ends up being the trigger for these kinds of blow-ups whenever they're out together. Felix just gives a simple nod and starts peeling a new quest sheet off the board. But then she looks him right in the eye and says she knows he was the one who handled that guy, even though his movement was way too fast for her to even see. She asks him why he goes out of his way to hide his strength like that, especially since he could have ended it even louder if he wanted to. Felix looks him right in the eye and says he definitely isn't just some F-ranker, asking if he's actually an S-rank adventurer. Jay explains that as soon as people find out how strong a guy is, they just try to use him or start drama. So Felix asks if he's speaking from experience. He tells her about the time he stayed outside the royal capital, saying he realized it's way better to be looked down on than to deal with people constantly bothering him. Jay mentions he doesn't really care about being respected anyway, which leads Felix to call him a pretty complicated guy. She laughs and tells him he's also way too nice and always getting into other people's business, leaving Jay wondering if she's actually complimenting him or not. Moving on, Felix mentions it's actually been tough to find a quest that fits Q's specific abilities. So Jay says he might have found something. He points at the board and says they should find something better than just hauling luggage, which catches Felix off guard for a second. Aisha checks the details and says, Quest 39 is a C-rank escort mission for a merchant, but she warns them it's usually for a full party. She quickly realizes her mistake and asks if they're actually working together as a team, while Felix just gives her this knowing look. The two of them decide it'll be fine, with Jay telling her they won't have any trouble handling the job together. Aisha smiles and tells Jay that with his track record, there's no way they'd have any problems, but Felix just stands there looking annoyed, muttering about how much everyone seems to trust him. Aisha keeps going, saying that even if other adventurers tease him for his rank, he's actually great, never missing a deadline or messing up an order, which only makes Felix more skeptical as she points out how much the guild staff really likes him. She huffs and says maybe she should just take Aisha out to dinner instead, walking away while Jay tries to get her to wait. Ignoring the drama for a second, Jay turns back to the counter and tells Aisha to just finish up the paperwork. Aisha gets a kick out of it, thinking she definitely made Felix jealous, while Jay just stands there wondering why she's even mad. All the while, Felix is just in the background giving off a super dark and grumpy vibe. The next morning starts off bright and sunny as they head out. Walking together, Felix asks if he's really okay with a merchant escort job instead of just hauling luggage. Jay explains that the whole point is just getting to the destination safely, so calling the job hauling luggage actually fits perfectly. And Felix finally gets what he's saying. She lets out a little sound as it clicks. But then Jay notices their client is already waiting by a horse carriage. Someone shouts from the distance, and it turns out to be Mark. He waves his hand and calls out to both Jay and Felix, looking really happy to see them. Felix is surprised to see him again, remembering how they saved him and his family from that attack a while back. Jay asks him if he's doing okay now. Mark says the doctors in the capital are top tier, and he's doing great thanks to Jay's help. Mark asks if they're the ones guarding him this time, and Jay confirms that he and Felix have the job covered. Since some adventurers pull shady moves on their last jobs, Mark is just glad he's traveling with people he can actually trust. Jay goes over the route, mentioning they'll head southeast over the mountain toward Jerica town to pick up some goods, estimating that at this pace they should reach the place just after noon. Mark says he's got it and will make sure they have enough food for the 3-day trip, and Jay confirms that they're heading out today just like they planned, pointing out that if they move now, they'll make it there just after noon. Mark stands there looking completely lost. He just asks what Jay is talking about. The horses are left at the guild for now because Q is literally flying the whole wagon through the clouds. Mark loses it, yelling about how high up they are and how fast they're moving. Felix mentions that this is actually how they got him to the doctor's place when he was hurt. Mark is pretty shocked and asks if that's really how they did it. He laughs it off, saying he was barely awake back then, so that's why everything felt like a blur. Q keeps cruising over the forest, but Jay suddenly looks back like he senses something behind them. Way off in the distance, a dark shape is hovering over the mountains and closing in on their position. It's a massive monster bird known as an arrowhawk, and it looks like it's looking for a fight. Mark notices it chasing them and wonders why it's so aggressive when they aren't even near any nests. He's actually pretty impressed by how huge the thing is. Jay asks Mark what that thing in his hand is, and Mark explains his son found the stone outside the castle walls yesterday and gave it to him as a lucky charm, thinking the blue and yellow colors are pretty and wishing his kid could see this view. But Felix snaps and tells him this isn't the time for a family story. Mark asks what the big deal is, and that's when Jay points out the monster bird is actually chasing him specifically, realizing that the stone Mark is holding is actually an egg, which sends the merchant into a total panic. Mark can't believe it's an egg, but Jay confirms the pattern and colors match an arrowhawk perfectly. Felix yells at him to dump it immediately since those birds are the fastest things in the sky, so Mark keeps losing it while the bird stays locked on. And Jay points out that even if he drops it now, the hawk is already way too angry to stop its attack. Jay figures the egg was probably just going to be monster food anyway, if a kid could find it, though he realizes the hatchling might end up bigger than Q. Q is doing his best to pick up the pace, but hauling 3 people and a 200-kilogram wagon makes it impossible to outrun the hawk, leaving Felix to step up to the edge of the wagon, declaring that she'll be the one to drive the monster off. She fires off her attack, but the bird is way too quick and dodges every single shot like it's nothing. Jay tells Mark they need to switch spots right now, moving fast because the arrowhawk is already diving straight for them with its wings wide open. That bird is beyond pissed. One shot from that beak would easily punch a hole through a person. But Jay isn't sweating it. He figures the hawk is after Mark or the dragon, and while these things are a total pain to fight from the ground, being at the same altitude makes things way easier. He waits for the perfect opening and then strikes, swinging his blade with enough force to intercept the bird mid-air. The hawk's eyes go wide as it realizes it messed up. Jay just tells the creature they both had some pretty bad luck today. The hit connects clean and sends the massive bird spiraling down toward the forest below, leaving Felix totally stunned that he dropped it in one hit. Jay just shrugs it off, saying he used the flat of his blade to just knock it out since the whole situation was kind of their fault anyway. He tells Mark to just stay cool and the bird won't bother him anymore. The merchant finally breathes again and thanks him for the help. Felix looks down at the dragon and mentions how things would have been a total disaster if Jay wasn't around. Q just chirps back like it doesn't have a care in the world while the egg Jay took earlier accidentally slips and starts falling through the air. Jay looks back for a second, but Felix starts freaking out, saying the egg is definitely going to break. Jay tells her it's fine. The shell is basically as hard as a rock, and it ends up landing perfectly in the bird's nest. Jay mentions that if they're lucky, it'll still hatch just fine, leaving the bird dizzy and confused in the trees. Even with all the random drama along the way, they finally make it to the town of Jellica and drop Mark off safely. Mark is seriously impressed. I'm telling Jay that having a dragon for transport is a total game changer since he didn't even have to worry about bandits. Jay just smiles and says it was all thanks to the little guy. As they pull up to the gate, Mark still can't get over how fast the whole trip was. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out some cash, asking Jay to please take it as a thank you. Jay tries to turn it down, telling the merchant it's really not necessary since the guild is already paying him for the escort mission, but Mark won't take no for an answer. He tells Jay that for a merchant, saving time and staying safe is worth way more than money, so this is basically just a small tip. Jay sits out in the grass with Q, thinking about how he didn't really do anything that big, even though the merchant was so thankful for the help. It's just Felix walking up with the groceries, telling him he's totally out of touch if he thinks taking down a massive bird is nothing. Jay just smiles and welcomes her back, but she keeps going, explaining that for a guy like Mark, what Jay did was a lifesaver. Jay wonders if that's really how people see it. Yet looking down at the seashell in his hand, he realizes she's probably right. It's a nice moment, so he changes the subject and asks if she finished getting everything they needed. She tells him she's all set, and Jay mentions he decided to give her that tip from the merchant as a thanks for suggesting the transport gig in the first place. Felix just giggles to herself, much because it turns out she already blew the entire tip on a massive hunk of meat as a reward for Q. The little dragon's eyes light up at the sight of it. Q starts munching away happily, making satisfied noises while the two of them watch their partner enjoy the feast. From there, they take Felix's advice and start a proper transport business, flying across the land and knocking out all kinds of different requests. Later on, once Q is finally a pro at flying long distances, Jay is hanging out when someone suddenly calls out to get his attention. An older guy with glasses looks Jay over and asks if he's Mr. Steldom. The carriage wheels keep turning as they pull through the gates of a massive mansion. Jay looks out the window and can't believe how big the place is, while the butler explains they've arrived at the Tyrrell Earl's estate in the capital. Jay's pretty shocked to be at a noble's house, so he asks if the butler was the one snooping around the guild lately. The old man admits it was him, and explains he checked everything, from Jay's delivery record to how he treats his clients, and even his reputation with the staff. The butler gives a little smile, saying he's finally sure Jay is the right person for his lady's request. He starts mentioning that the daughter of the Iron family is safe despite the disaster, but then he stops because the client herself, not a girl named Nenah, walks out of the house with her maids. The butler introduces them, and Nenah looks totally thrilled, blushing as she welcomes Jay to the mansion. Nenah gives a big smile and tells Jay she's really thankful he made the trip on such short notice. She's actually pretty nervous, though, thinking to herself that she has no clue how to handle the formal side of a meeting like this. Jay just smiles back and says, "The pleasure is all his." So Nenah tells him to follow her inside. They end up in a massive, fancy bedroom for some tea. Looking around at all the expensive stuff, Jay can't help but wonder if Felix grew up living like this too. He gets straight to the point and mentions he heard she has a specific job for him, and Nenah confirms that's right. She starts acting really shy, fidgeting around on the edge of the bed and barely able to get her words out. Finally, she pulls out a fancy-looking envelope and blushes, telling him she's the one who wrote it. Jay reaches out for it and asks if the job is just to deliver the letter, and she tells him yes. He follows up by asking where it needs to go, but Nenah seems a bit caught off guard by his business-only attitude. She looks at him and asks if he isn't even going to ask what's inside the letter, leaving Jay looking a little confused. Nenah looks a little disappointed and asks Jay if he really isn't even curious about what's inside. Jay admits he's a bit interested, but says if it isn't something dangerous, he doesn't need to know the details since it's probably just a love letter. As Nenah worries if the guy will hate her or if her feelings will actually reach him, Jay keeps it professional and says his only job is to deliver it. Hearing that, Nenah gives him a warm smile and says she's really happy she decided to ask him for help. Jay reminds her that he hasn't even finished the delivery yet, but she just giggles and says he's just as interesting as the rumors said. She starts explaining that the letter needs to go to a guy named Wayne who lives just outside of town, calling him a total gentleman. Nenah mentions the word as he's actually a former prince who got stripped of his rank and sent away. Jay confirms the name while Nenah explains that even though he's a commoner now, she had to tell her butler the letter was for her father just to get it out. She puts a finger to her lips and asks him to keep it a secret from everyone at home, which makes Jay finally realize why she was hiding it under her pillow earlier. He tells her he's got it, then takes a sip of his tea and asks what the pay for the job is going to be. Nenah offers 300,000 rin for the delivery, which makes Jay completely lose it and spit his tea everywhere. She worries that might be too cheap, but Jay tells her it's actually way too much and says he'll do it for a tenth of that price. Nenah can't believe he'd take so little, but Jay just smiles and explains that if he charges less, she'll be able to afford to send even more letters. Nenah realizes he's right, and she starts blushing like crazy, giggling to herself because she's so happy with how thoughtful he's being. The story shifts to Q flying over Keekan, a quiet little town that most people and merchants just pass by on their way to the capital. As they look down at a small cluster of houses near the woods, Jay points out the one they're looking for. He walks up and knocks on the door, and a guy who looks like he just rolled out of bed opens it up to see who's there. A bunch of guys are partying inside, laughing and joking about whether a girl showed up early, while Jay just asks if the guy who sent the request is around. He introduces himself as Jay Amsterdam and asks to speak with Wayne, and the messy-looking guy at the door just gives him a nod. The dude points at himself with a smirk and says he's the one, leaving Jay standing there totally surprised by how this gentleman actually looks. The thugs inside start cracking up at how shocked Jay looks, mocking the idea of Wayne being some kind of prince while he's hanging out with losers like them. One of the guys complains that they're out of drinks, so Wayne tells them all to shut up before asking Jay what he wants. Jay explains he's there to deliver a letter from Lady Nenah of the Tyrrell family, and the second Wayne hears her name, his eyes go wide. He rips the envelope open like a complete animal, making Jay think to himself that the guy really should have been a bit more careful with it. As Wayne starts reading, a weird little smirk crawls across his face, and he starts chuckling to himself. He seems totally blown away by what's written, while Jay mentions how they only met once at a party before Wayne got kicked out of the palace, and they've only sent a few letters since then. Wayne just bursts out laughing, wondering out loud just how much of a fantasy that brat has built up about him in her head. He brags that if he plays his cards right, he's going to marry into a count's family while Jay just watches him, realizing that the reality of the situation is pretty depressing. It turns out the Prince Wayne Nenah fell for never actually existed. The rumors were true, and he was just a low-ranking royal who got kicked out because he was such a mess. The thugs ask what he's going on about, and Wayne realizes this letter is his golden ticket to a rich life, so he waves the guys over to show it off. The guys gather around, and even though they can't even read the handwriting, they can tell the girl is obsessed with him, barely believing a noble actually wrote all that stuff. The thugs in the tavern completely lose it, laughing about how some high-class girl is actually in love with a guy like Wayne. They mock him for being a jobless loser who only survives on handouts from the palace, wondering what she could possibly see in him. Wayne just smirks and tells them they wouldn't know quality if it hit them. He brags that he and Lady Nenah are just on a totally different level than a bunch of guys like them, acting like he's already won. One of the guys jokes that if Wayne actually becomes a count, he wants to be his personal knight. The others jump in too, with one saying he'll take the easy job of being the gardener, while Jay just stands there reminding himself he's just the delivery guy. Jay tries to stay focused on the job he was trusted with, but one of the drunker thugs makes a gross comment about wanting to be the guy who keeps the lady company at night. The group keeps the jokes going, telling the guy to back off and not try to steal the spot of the second husband, while they all sit around laughing. Wayne actually stops to think about it with a creepy look on his face. He wonders out loud if bringing his trashy friends along might actually work out as long as the count never finds out. Jay is honestly floored by how much of a scumbag this guy is. He decides right then that he isn't going to say a single word more than he has to, choosing to just stay out of this mess. He cuts through the noise and asks Wayne for a signature to prove the letter was actually delivered. Wayne just gives him a dirty look, or acting annoyed that Jay is even still in the room. Wayne groans about the signature and just bends over to scribble it on the floor, asking if that's enough to finally get Jay out of his hair. As Jay gets ready to leave, he realizes Nenah is definitely going to ask how Wayne acted when he got the letter. He struggles with whether he should be honest and tell her to dump this loser, or if it's better to just tell her she had a run-in with a bad bug and should just forget he ever existed. Jay remembers how Nenah hid the love letter to avoid getting a lecture from her butler, but as he was leaving the mansion, the old man stopped him. The butler asked Jay to just look at things exactly as they are. It was clear the old guy already knew Wayne had turned into a complete loser. Back in the tavern, the group of thugs starts egging Wayne on to write a reply, laughing about what a great idea it would be. Wayne tells Jay to hang on a second while he digs around for some scrap paper, acting like the whole thing is just a joke. When Jay asks about the payment for the delivery, Wayne just shrugs it off and says, "The girl who sent the letter will be the one footing the bill." The guys around him laugh about how she's rich and would probably pay a fortune just to get a single note from a guy like Wayne. Wayne finishes scribbling and smirks, bragging to his friends that his letter is definitely going to make the girl fall for him even harder. The thugs cheer him on, joking that his background as a former prince gave him a natural talent for playing girls like a pro. Wayne tosses the crumpled response over to Jay like it's trash, telling him he's done with the whole thing. The guy just walks away without another word, leaving Jay standing there trying to figure out if he should even bother saying anything else. Jay isn't having any of it. He holds out the crumpled paper and tells Wayne he should be the one to deliver this himself. Wayne stops in his tracks and looks back with a look of pure disbelief, asking Jay what the hell he just said. The guy argues that since Jay is heading back to Nenah anyway, it's just on the way. But Jay shoots that down fast, saying that's not a word for the sender to use. Wayne loses his cool and grabs Jay's collar, screaming that he's royalty and shouldn't be messed with. Jay just looks him in the eye and corrects him, calling him a former royal. Jay doesn't back down. He tells Wayne to his face that it's pretty obvious he got exiled because his personality is completely trashed. While Wayne starts to boil over, Jay keeps going, or telling him that Nenah's actual feelings aren't just some joke for him to use to entertain himself. He looks at the guy with total disgust, calling him out for being a parasite who tries to trick a young girl just to get by. Jay finishes him off by asking if this is really how someone with royal blood acts. He tops it off by mockingly calling him Mr. Former Prince. That's the final straw for Wayne, who swings a wild punch while yelling at Jay to mind his own business. But Jay just shuts him down instantly. Wayne is left shaking in total shock while his thug friends in the back look on, totally confused about why he's acting so scared all of a sudden. The thugs aren't backing down. One of them steps up and starts yelling at Jay, clearly looking for a fight while the guy in the back asks what's going on. But before anyone can move, Jay drops one of them and casually says, "My bad." Jay explains that unlike them, he isn't exactly used to rough stuff, even though he's landing hits and knocking them flat. Standing over the pile of groaning guys, Jay figures he must have accidentally hit some pressure points, while one thug looks up in shock and asks who he even is. Jay just gives a bored look and says he's a simple transporter, but the guy on the floor can't believe it because he's way too strong for that. Jay fixes his hair and plays it off, saying he was only defending himself and that the thugs basically just knocked themselves out. He turns his focus to the last person standing, staring him down and asking if he's actually going to try his luck or just walk away. Jay lets out a sigh, realizing he's just wasting his time beating up a bunch of kids who have nothing better to do. He bends down to pick up the letter and reads the note Wayne wrote. It's a fake love letter asking for a ton of money, and suddenly any guilt Jay had about wrecking those guys completely vanishes. Jay decides he's going to be honest with Nenah, so she finally sees the truth. Then he calls out to one of the kids shaking on the ground. Jay gives a serious look, telling the person he just saved not to go around bragging about what happened. He thinks the whole thing is actually pretty embarrassing. So the scene shifts back to the massive noble estate where Nenah is waiting, and suddenly a knock sounds at her door, catching her attention immediately. She rushes over and looks out, her eyes lighting up when she realizes Jay is already back. Nenah calls him over, and Jay gives a casual greeting, telling Lady Nenah that he's returned from his trip and she can't believe her luck. Nenah thanks him, saying she's honestly shocked he managed to get back so fast. But her mind is only on one thing. She blushes and asks with a hopeful look what Lord Wayne had to say in his letter. Nenah gets all excited and pulls him inside. Sam yelling for the maids to bring some tea, while Jay tries to get her to stay calm for a second because he has to break the news. Jay gets a serious look on his face and tells her he's going to explain everything that happened, step by step, and Nenah settles down, looking at him with total focus. She tells him to please go ahead and tell her everything. Moving on, the mood in the room completely tanks after Jay tells her the truth. Nenah sits there slumped over at the table, looking totally crushed by the reality of the situation. Nenah stares down at the crumpled letter in her hands, barely able to process that Lord Wayne would actually say something like that to her. Jay watches her with a serious look, explaining that even though he's just a transporter and probably shouldn't meddle, he felt like he had to report the honest truth about what he saw. Nenah's hands start shaking as she grips her dress. She can't even finish her sentence as the realization starts to sink in, and the tears start flowing fast. She cries out, finally seeing that the only thing the guy ever cared about was her family's name and social standing. Jay starts to freak out seeing her cry, wondering if he should have just kept his mouth shut. But he tells himself she would have ended up hurt anyway once the truth came out later, so he tries to fix the mood by making excuses for the guy. Suggesting maybe he's just focused on hanging out with his friends and isn't really looking for a relationship right now. He keeps trying to comfort her, insisting it's not like Wayne actually hates her, though he quickly realizes he's working way too hard to defend the jerk. Just then, a knock at the door sounds and Jay tells them to come in. The butler steps into the room with a somber look, admitting that he ended up overhearing a good bit of their conversation from outside, leaving Nenah completely heartbroken. She sobs into her hands, admitting that everything turned out exactly how her grandfather said it would. She confesses she thought the butler was just lying to her before to keep her away from Wayne. The butler looks on with a bit of pity, simply saying he's glad she finally understands the truth. Jay tries to cheer Nenah up, telling her she's a charming lady who's bound to meet a much better guy later on. Nenah looks up at him, asking if he really thinks so, and the butler chimes in to back Jay up. He keeps the compliments going, telling her she's pure, elegant, and honestly as pretty as a flower. Nenah just stands there completely speechless. Her face turns bright red and her eyes sparkle as she takes in the kind words. The butler steps forward and hands over a heavy bag of coins, telling Jay to please accept it for his services. Jay is caught off guard by the weight of the bag and asks if this much is really okay. The butler insists it's a small price to pay for Nenah's future now that she's finally done with Wayne. As Jay turns to leave, Nenah calls out his name to stop him for a second, why looking like she doesn't want him to go just yet. She nervously asks when he'll be able to come by and visit her again. Jay tells her he'll be around whenever there's work to do, so Nenah asks where she can find him if she needs to. He mentions he's usually hanging out at the guild cafeteria on 2nd Street, and he tells her to just head over there whenever she wants. He even waves as he walks off, suggesting she can just leave a message with Aisha if he's not around. Nenah lets out a bright, happy response, finally smiling again as she tells him she's got it. Nenah gives a quiet nod of agreement as Jay starts heading out. Finally, feeling at peace with how things went, she thinks about how transporters connect people for the better and decides Jay is pretty amazing, while Jay wonders if his job is really about seeing these stories through to the end. While flying back on cue, Jay starts second-guessing himself and wonders if he handled that whole situation the right way. He admits he doesn't really know, and Q just chirps back like he's asking what's up. Later on at the guild, things are busy as usual. Felix is decked out in her waitress gear, weaving through the crowd with a tray of drinks while telling everyone she's sorry for the wait. Jay is just chilling at a table by himself, grabbing a quick bite of soup amidst the noise. He's minding his own business until he feels something weird poking his boot, making him look down to see what's happening under the table. He's pretty surprised to find a tiny mouse standing there, holding a little scroll in its paws. The sight of a mouse acting like a messenger catches him totally off guard. He nearly chokes on his food, staring down in disbelief. He realizes this isn't just any normal animal because he can actually feel magic coming off it. The little guy doesn't seem shy at all, tugging on Jay's pants to get his attention and making sure Jay is looking right at him. Jay just stares, completely stunned by the weird interaction. The mouse finally drops the little rolled-up note right next to Jay's shoe. As soon as the delivery is done, it turns around and bolts across the floor, leaving Jay alone with the mystery message. Jay watches the tiny messenger scurry away under the guild's tables. He looks down at the paper left behind, seeing a simple map to the deep forest and a note mentioning a massive reward of 1 million Karen. Jay's pretty surprised, thinking he's never had a job offer show up quite like this. He figures for that much money, whatever needs moving must be a big deal. He knows he could just walk away, but decides he should at least go hear what the client has to say. The destination is a place called the Witch's Forest. It's sitting right near the Demon King's territory, which is usually a death trap, but flying in should keep them safe. A little while later, Q's wings cut through the air as they soar over the thick tree line. Jay spots a lone cabin tucked away in the woods and tells Q that's the spot. On the legends say a woman with insane magical powers lives deep in these woods. People call her a witch, and the rumors say she might even be a demon, though she isn't wanted for any crimes. Jay figures as long as there aren't any bounties on her, she probably isn't a threat. He stands at the front door and introduces himself as the transporter, explaining he followed the letter from the mouse. A voice from inside simply tells him to enter. The door creaks open to reveal a woman with long hair and glasses wearing a fancy fur-lined robe. She looks him over with a smile and asks if he's the transporter from the stories. Jay tells her he isn't sure which stories she's heard, but he's probably the guy. He's not the type to go snooping around someone's home, but the scale of the room has him curious about. Alua says she likes his answer. Jay stands there looking around the room, thinking there is way too much stuff in here to even process, but he notices that he doesn't feel any strange or dangerous energy coming from her at all. Alua tells him he can just shove some of the junk aside and sit down, though Jay thinks that's a pretty big ask considering the mess. She laughs and tells him he can drop the formal talk since she hasn't done anything worth being respected for. And then, she introduces herself as Alua. She mentions that while everyone calls her the Witch of the Forest, she'd much rather be known as the Forest Beauty. She asks Jay if he could help her out by correcting anyone who uses the wrong name. Jay just gives her a blank look and says he'll tell people that if they ask, which is apparently enough for her. She casually lets him know that she doesn't have a single thing on under her robe and is usually just naked, but she only threw the clothes on so she wouldn't be rude to a guest. She admits she isn't really ashamed of how she looks, which leads to her asking if she should just strip right now. Jay doesn't skip a beat and tells her to definitely keep her clothes on, thinking to himself that this woman really operates on her own wavelength. Alua says she's sorry if she went too far, but she's just happy to finally talk to a smart guy. Jay tells her he doesn't care and asks what exactly he's supposed to be moving for her. She starts clearing off a desk by just shoving piles of books onto the floor, making Jay wonder if she's actually cool with treating her stuff like that. Alua asks Jay if he's up to speed on the war between the Allied forces and the Demon King's army. Jay says of course he is, so she explains that this whole situation is actually a job for the military, where she was hired to break down some weird, unknown magic the demons have been using. She admits it's a total drag since the request came all the way from the front lines to her hut, and now she needs Jay to deliver her findings to the 4th Army's operations department. She tells him it's 2 months of her life spent putting this magic theory together, but there's more to it than just her time. She mentions that 6 soldiers actually died just to get the data to her in the first place, and she finished the whole report based on those materials they brought deep into the woods. Jay looks down at the stack of papers in his hands. I'm finally realizing just how much weight this task carries because this work represents the final results of those soldiers' lives. He decides he has to accept the request and tells Alua he'll take the job. And then, she suddenly tells him to make sure he charges the military a massive fee for the delivery. Jay is pretty confused by the sudden change in tone, but Alua just explains that she only cares about magic and doesn't have a cent to her name. Jay asks what happened to that million she mentioned before, but she just ignores him and says it's only fair to charge them that much. She starts writing a note for him to give to the chief of staff so he can get paid. Jay heads out from the hut, thinking about how Alua is pretty weird, but must be a big deal if high-ranking soldiers follow her lead. She reminds him to get a signature upon delivery, and he agrees to handle it as he walks away. But before he gets too far, she gives him a warm smile and says the only thing that really matters to her is that he makes it back in one piece. Later on, Jay is walking through the capital, planning out his trip and thinking about the demon army and Q's stamina, when suddenly Felix spots him in the crowd. She runs up and asks how his delivery work is going, so he tells her he's just about to start and asks what she's been up to. She says she's finished for the day, which reminds Jay of something he needs to check, but she cuts him off, excitedly shoving her adventurer card in his face and telling him he has to check this out. Jay sees the update and congratulates her on finally hitting D rank, though she just laughs it off and says she's only getting started. But then she notices his expression and asks why he looks so serious all of a sudden. Jay hesitates for a second, then tells her that his new job is actually going to take him right near the Ironed territory. Felix looks completely shocked, asking if he's really going to be that close to her old home, and Jay confirms that's the plan. Then he asks her if the old mansion is still standing, and if there's anything special she wants him to bring back for her. Felix asks Jay where he's heading, and he tells her he's got a delivery for the frontline operations department, but she hesitates for a second, grabbing onto her clothes while she tries to find the words to say. Jay mentions how he was really careful when dealing with Raul and Q, but things are different now because the Demon King's territory is crawling with stuff like birdmen and gargoyles, and since there are magic-using monsters in the sky, flying just makes them a huge target. He points out how dangerous the front lines have become, saying they might not even be able to reach her old place, so he's really just planning to check out the situation. But then he tells her if she's still coming along, he's going to need her to back him up with her magic. Felix is caught completely off guard by the offer, and she lights up instantly, thanking him with a massive smile as she gets pumped to go. While she's celebrating, Jay just sighs to himself. It wasn't exactly his plan to bring her, but since she's already there, he figures there's no turning back now. Felix starts thinking out loud, wondering if her family's old mansion is even still standing after all this time. Felix looks down, mentioning how much she wants to find the important brooch her mother gave her, and Jay tells her he gets it. He explains that since the army moved in, the Iron Territory might be under their thumb. He's just hoping the whole place hasn't been burned to the ground yet, then asks if she's ready to go. Jay tells her they'll move out as soon as they get all the supplies they need and suggests meeting up in front of the guild, which she agrees to. Later on, the door to the room creaks open, totally catching Q off guard as the little guy jumps a bit on the bed. Felix walks in wondering where that noise came from, complaining to herself about how sketchy these cheap inns can be. She sits down on the edge of the bed and starts digging through her bag, eventually pulling out some nutritional tonic to help her bounce back. Thinking about the magic she used during today's quest, she figures she better drink up, even though the taste is honestly pretty gross. She slaps her cheeks hard to wake herself up and get focused for what's coming next. But her mind starts drifting back to the night she can't forget, the night the Demon King's army swarmed her home and turned everything into a nightmare. She remembers hiding on the stairs, frozen with fear, as she caught a glimpse of that one evil face she'll never be able to scrub from her memory. Felix can't shake the memory of that monster standing over the bodies. It's a sight that stayed with her ever since. Back in the chaos, her maid drags her through the mansion while monsters close in from every side. The maid yells for her to move faster, but Felix is struggling to keep up and begs her to wait. She looks back toward the open door, crying out for her mom and dad. She doesn't want to leave them behind, but the maid just keeps pulling her away. Felix is told to stop looking back at the blood in the bodies. She's forced to focus only on what's in front of her if she wants to survive, and they finally reach a hidden door behind a bookshelf. The maid tells her she has to use this secret passage to get out of there. With a look of total sadness, the maid promises that everyone else has already gotten away safely. So she tells Felix to hurry and go, but Felix is so confused and panicked she can't even think. She just grabs a lantern and starts running into the dark tunnel, and she just follows the instructions without question. She splashes through the water until she finally sees a bright light at the end, leading her outside. When she gets out, she looks back at her home in flames and realizes the area is empty. There's nobody there, and that's when it hits her that the maid lied about everyone escaping. She collapses on the grass and loses it. She realizes that at that moment, she was the only one who actually made it out alive. Felix stands there crying in the pouring rain, thinking about how the maid went back into the fire to save the others, and she doesn't even know where she wandered off to after that. She just has this blurry memory of the army eventually finding her. She ended up with absolutely nothing but the clothes she was wearing, losing every memory of her family and feeling like everything was gone. After starting out as an adventurer, she eventually just got used to the daily grind of fighting. But she still looks back at that day, wondering if she could have actually fought back if she hadn't panicked so hard. The memory of that day still weighs on her while she sits alone. Then she grips her dagger, determined to change things, and she stops looking back. She steps forward, ready to face whatever comes next as she finally heads out with her sword. Back in the present, Jay tells Q to keep the flight low as they move over the trees, and the dragon just chirps back. Felix watches the dragon and mentions how it's pretty impressive that Q understands exactly what they're saying, so Jay says he noticed that even back when Q was a tiny lizard, and Felix figures that's just how a Bahamut is. Felix mentions her own business is really just a side thing, but she trails off like there's more, and she looks down at the lake, thinking about how seeing such a familiar place brings back all those memories. Jay notices the mansion is getting close, but points out there's no sign of the army that's supposed to be here. So he wonders if monsters have completely taken over the area since the Allied forces seem to have retreated. It looks like they've gone a bit too deep into enemy territory, so Jay tells Q to circle around until Felix spots something and shouts that the Ironed Mansion is actually still standing right there in the woods. Jay sees the coast is clear and figures if the house is okay, the enemy probably just ignored the brooch. He warns her they don't know where the monsters are hiding, so they need to grab it and leave fast. And Jay says he's ready while Felix points out an attic window they can use to sneak inside, leading to Q landing softly on the roof of the massive, ivy-covered stone building. Jay tells Q to stay put on the roof so they can make a quick getaway, since summoning him again would just waste magic, and the two of them slip inside the attic, where Felix leads the way down a ladder into the dark mansion while Jay keeps watch. They move through the ruined hallways together, passing by broken pillars and cobwebs in the silence of the old house. Jay mentions he can feel monsters nearby, and figures they're using the place as a base. But Felix stops and points out the door to her old room, standing there for a second before they head inside. Jay tells her to open it up so they can check the area, and even though she looks pretty nervous, Felix reaches for the handle and slowly pushes the door open, the old wood creaking as she peeks into the darkness. Jay leads the way inside with his sword ready, keeping his eyes peeled for any hidden threats in the shadows, and he finds a massive orc just sitting there, completely making itself at home on one of the fancy sofas. Jay doesn't hesitate for a second, rushing forward and swinging his blade before the monster even has a chance to move. Jay puts everything into a single massive swing that catches the monster off guard, and the blade connects with a heavy thud, cutting deep into the orc's neck before it can even react. Jay tells Felix it's handled and they need to move fast, but she's just standing there sweating, trying to keep up with how quickly he finished the fight. She spots a small frame on the wall and lights up. She found exactly what she was looking for. But Jay doesn't have time to celebrate, telling her to grab it and run as heavy footsteps start thumping right outside the door. The door flies open and a huge orc captain bursts in, holding a barrel of booze, looking like it was ready to party. The monster stops dead in its tracks when it sees the two of them standing over its dead buddy, and for a second, nobody moves. Then the orc's eyes go wide in shock. Jay just looks annoyed, calling the monster a pig with some really bad timing while Felix starts to freak out. The orc drops its barrel, booze splashing everywhere as it starts screaming its head off. So Jay yells at Felix to call Q for a quick escape, grabbing her and bolting before the whole mansion comes down on them. Jay sizes up the orc captain, thinking the monster's power and spirit are easily B-rank level. But that's not the main problem since the monster lets out a deafening roar and swings its massive arm, forcing Jay to duck low as the blade whistles just inches over his head. He doesn't miss a beat, sliding right between the orc's legs to get behind it while landing a brutal strike that sends blood flying and makes the beast scream in agony. Jay stands over the fallen monster as the room goes quiet, showing just how much stronger he really is. Felix just stares at the body, completely shocked that he managed to drop such a huge monster in a single second. Jay tells her they need to move and asks where Q is. She says she tried calling, but the dragon hasn't arrived. They both rush to the window to see what's going on, and Jay notices something moving fast through the sky. It turns out a gargoyle is circling the mansion, and Q is busy tangled up in a fight with the flying stone monster. Q finally breaks loose from the scrap, diving down at top speed to get to the window before more enemies show up. Jay asks if the gargoyle showed up while they were waiting, and Felix points it out. She's sure it's the right one since she can see a clear scar on its tail. Jay checks to make sure he's looking at the same target, while Felix explains that this is the same monster that led the whole pack the night they got raided. Then the beast lets out a huge roar. Q moves in close, but these things have super tough skin that makes them really hard to cut with normal swords, so Jay tells Felix he can't really go all out while they're flying and tells her to get her magic ready. She says she's got it and shouts for her flame shot to hit the mark, blasting the gargoyle with a direct hit of fire. Felix sees the flames connecting but starts to freak out because it doesn't look like it's doing any damage. But Jay tells her to keep the pressure on since the monster's speed is actually dropping. Felix is shocked, but then the gargoyle roars out in pain, finally showing that the fire is starting to wear it down. Down on the ground and in the trees, a whole group of other monsters just stands there watching the sky, waiting to see what happens next. Jay notices the gargoyle has called in backup and realizes they're cornered. He tells Felix they have to go for broke and take a huge gamble, which freaks Felix out, but she steps up anyway. She yells for Jay to hold on to Q for dear life once she lets her magic loose. She has no clue what's about to happen, but she screams out her flame shot. The gargoyle can only stare as the massive ball of fire comes straight for its face. Jay yells for Q to move, and the dragon pulls a wild spinning dive that has Felix screaming while they narrowly escape the blast zone. The magic connects perfectly, and as they fly away, a massive explosion lights up the entire sky behind them, completely swallowing the gargoyle. The monster looks totally shocked for a split second before the fire takes over, and then the whole thing just comes apart. It's a total mess of smoke and fire, fall toward the woods below. Jay lets out a huge sigh of relief and says they somehow made it. but Felix and Q are still completely losing their minds from the drop. The gargoyles' remains hit the ground like a rock, while Felix just keeps screaming until they finally land. Everyone is slumped over and totally exhausted, with Jay just muttering about how that was way too close for comfort. Felix mentions they still got tossed around even though they were holding on tight, but Jay says they only survived because of Q. The little dragon just chirps back like it's no big deal. And then Felix asks what happened to the gargoyle. Jay points over to a pile of pixelated junk on the ground, telling her the monster is in a pretty bad state now, which makes Felix giggle. She blushes a bit and tells Jay he's definitely the one responsible for making such a mess out of that thing. She explains she saw the whole thing while they were falling, and asks him how he even thought of hitting the monster with a sword and magic at the same time, because Jay just shrugs it off, saying it was a split-second decision based on experience. Felix doesn't buy the humble act, though. She says the idea was amazing, and that his sword skills are the only reason it actually worked, but Jay insists they were just lucky. He tells her he's just glad they actually found the brooch they were looking for, and Felix quietly agrees as she stares at the silver jewelry in her hand. She mentions how the mansion had become a total monster den, and says she's just happy the brooch was still there. And then she admits she couldn't have done any of this if she was on her own. Jay tells her it's really not a big deal and she shouldn't worry about it, and he waves his hand, acting like he only helped out because it was on the way anyway. Felix just looks at him with tears in her eyes, completely moved by what he did, and she leans in close toward him, giving Jay a real, heartfelt thank you for all his help. The scene shifts to the Allied Forces 4th Army Operations Headquarters, a busy military camp where a guard at the main tent reports that a guy just showed up with the magic analysis papers, and the man inside tells them to come on in. Jay walks in and hands over the box, telling them that these are the documents they were waiting for, so the older man in charge takes the delivery and thanks him. He looks pretty impressed, mentioning that Jay arrived way faster than he thought possible and that it really helps them out. The old man introduces himself as Brigadier General Halom. Jay shakes his hand and tells him his name is Jay Steldom and that he's just a transporter. But things get awkward fast when Halom looks at the bill. He sees the price tag of 1 million and can't believe it, and one of the soldiers nearby pipes up, "I was saying that's a total overcharge even if the delivery was quick." Jay just stands there looking blank, agreeing that it's a lot, but Felix steps in to defend the price. She explains they didn't know the front lines had moved, and they spent a ton of time wandering around just trying to find the camp. And Halom looks down at his desk, asking them exactly how much time has passed since those documents were first sent over to Alua. Halom takes a second to think it over, looking down at the papers and admitting that Felix has a fair point about the price. So he agrees to pay the million, but says they'll settle up once the person getting the delivery confirms everything is good. As the pair heads toward the back of the tent, Halom apologizes for the noise and the mess. Felix just tells him not to worry about it since they know they're in a war zone. The general starts venting, scratching his head while talking about how the Demon King's army is being a total nightmare at Ironed, which makes Jay stop in his tracks. Halom explains that a group of monsters turned the old Ironed estate into a base. It's mostly gargoyles and orcs, and they've got the whole military line stuck. Jay speaks up and asks if those gargoyles are the ones that use magic. The old man is actually surprised Jay knows so much about them. He goes on about how they're basically impossible to deal with since arrows bounce off their thick skin while they fly around blasting magic from above. Plus, there are giant orcs leading ground attacks, meaning a direct push from the army would just end in a total bloodbath. While the general complains about not being able to take the base back, Felix casually pipes up and says they already took care of those monsters on the way over. The room goes dead silent. Halom just stares at them, trying to process how 2 random transporters wiped out a force his entire army couldn't handle. Halom looks completely lost, asking Jay what he means by saying they defeated those monsters. Jay just keeps it simple, confirming he's talking about the gargoyles they ran into, and he adds that they only did it because they happened to be passing by the area. Felix is standing right there yelling at him because she can't believe he's being so casual about it. The general starts sweating, describing the gargoyles as flying fortresses that blast magic and have crazy high defense. Jay just nods along like it's no big deal, telling the old man that those are exactly the ones they took out. Halom adjusts his glasses, looking totally drained while he mumbles about how he just can't bring himself to believe any of this. He tries to test them, asking if they saw a massive orc with a giant sword leading the charge. He explains how that specific monster is a total nightmare because he's strong enough to keep all the other enemies motivated. Halom goes quiet for a second, then looks at Jay and asks how he even knew the orc had a great sword to begin with. Jay gives him a big smile and says they killed that orc too, once again claiming it was just something they did on the way over. Felix is in the background losing her mind, unable to deal with his passing by excuse again. The realization hits Halem like a ton of bricks. If those two leaders are dead, the enemy base is pretty much wide open. Right as he's processing this, one of his soldiers starts shouting for him. The soldier bursts in with a report, yelling that they found a bunch of gargoyle bodies near the Ironed Mansion. He looks panicked, telling the general that it looks like someone just cut them all down. Halom stares at Jay's sword, repeating the word sliced under his breath. He's completely floored, wondering what kind of insane power it would take to actually pull off a feat like that. One of the soldiers comes over to Halom, reporting that they've finally got the 1 million Karan payment ready to go, but the general completely loses it. He starts shaking and yelling at the top of his lungs that it's not even close to being enough money. The soldier just stands there looking totally confused while the general has his meltdown, realizing the entire situation has flipped on them. Halom gets right in Jay's face, looking desperate as he asks him to just name his price. He's practically begging Jay to tell him what he wants. Jay looks pretty awkward about the whole thing, scratching his head while he asks if maybe 3 million would be a fair amount, and the general and his man just stare at him like he's crazy. Halom can't believe Jay is asking for so little when he was ready to pay way more. And Jay just gives them a big smile and waves it off, saying 3 million is plenty. He's honestly a bit worried about what would happen if he asked for any more. Back at the forest house, the conversation shifts to why they didn't just use a magic animal to send the paperwork this time around, since Alua is just hanging out with her tea, explaining that her delivery magic has its limits. The distance was too far, and the destination was way too vague for a little mouse to find. She mentions that for someone as strong as Jay, 3 million is actually way too cheap. Turns out life on the front lines gives people a whole different idea of what things are worth. Jay sets the card down on the table, mentioning that everything worked out because Alua was the one who put the request in. He offers to give her 30% of the reward money as a cut, but she just waves her hand and says she's totally fine without it. Alua smiles and explains she already got paid by the army anyway, and honestly, just having someone around to talk to is worth way more to her than any amount of cash. Jay just gives a confident smirk and tells her he'll stop by again whenever he feels like it. He points out that as long as she keeps sending official requests, he'll definitely show up, making Alua laugh about how good he is at business. But as he's heading out, Jay suddenly remembers something important and pops his head back into the room. He brings up how his little summon lizard somehow turned into something that looks just like Bahamut, asking her if that's even a thing that can happen, and Alua gets a serious look in her eyes, telling him that while it's crazy, the chance of it happening isn't exactly zero. She goes on to explain that summoning magic is still a total mystery to most people, and the idea that monsters wait in a different dimension after a contract is mostly just a guess. She thinks it might just be a type of teleportation magic pulling them from somewhere in the world, leaving Jay feeling like if she doesn't have the answer, he definitely won't figure it out. Jay thanks Alua and says he'll have her check out his lizard next time he's around, even though she mentions she doesn't mind doing it right now. But he decides to pass for today, heading toward the exit as he wraps things up. Outside, Felix is hopping around trying to peek through the high windows, complaining she can't see a thing. Jay knows he's got to move because he can't keep a cute partner waiting, so the two of them head straight to the tavern, where they're served a massive, juicy steak that looks like a dream. Felix is practically in tears, saying it's been forever since she had a meal this good, and Jay is right there with her. Over at the counter, Aisha and a co-worker watch them lose it over the food, figuring the duo must have had a rough time lately. But as they eat, Jay stops to ask her if she's really sure about how they're splitting up the reward money. Felix just smiles and tells him that taking more would be a disgrace to her family name, especially since he did all the heavy lifting in the fight. Jay tries to give her credit for coming along and helping with the gargoyles, but she insists that him paying for this dinner is already more than enough, so he figures he'll just keep some extra cash ready for her if she ever gets in a tight spot. Just then, H brings their drinks over with a wink, telling them she's sorry for the wait. She mentions how they seem to be doing pretty well for themselves today, and Jay just sits back, happy that work finally went right for a change. Felix starts acting a bit strange. She looks off to the side with a sneaky little smirk like she's planning something, and while she was just sweating and nervously chugging her drink a second ago, she suddenly flips a switch. She puffs out her chest with all this fake confidence, trying to look cool, but then she hesitates, quietly calling out Jay's name. He just looks up from his drink and asks her what she wants, so she looks back down at her glass, blushing like crazy while Aisha watches from the background with a big grin. Felix is clearly struggling to get the words out, making Jay wonder if the alcohol is already hitting her. He asks if she can actually handle her drinks, but she just stares at him with watery eyes and a bright red face. Suddenly, she slams her hands on the table and yells his name, totally catching him off guard. He just gives her a confused look, and she starts rambling about how thankful she is. She knows she's already said it a dozen times today, but she feels like she hasn't said it enough, and then she clenches her fist and makes this big declaration, saying she's going to work as hard as she can to be a great adventurer and a top-tier mage. H loses it and starts laughing, shouting Felix's name while Jay just stands there wondering why she's making such a formal speech all of a sudden. As the night goes on at the tavern, Felix keeps yelling that she messed up, and that wasn't what she meant to say at all, but the others just tease her as the party continues. Nenah walks through the tavern doors, telling H to quit making things up just to mess with people. H just plays it off like she has no idea what she's talking about, and Nenah starts blushing, thinking to herself about how Jay is actually a lot more simple-minded than she expected. She has this sudden realization, and she yells out that she finally found him. Jay, Felix, and Aich all freeze and turn around with these shocked looks on their faces as Nenah walks up with a big smile and gives Jay a polite greeting. Jay recognizes her from the other day, but Felix just stands there looking completely panicked by the situation. Nenah mentions she heard he was hanging out here and asks if he's working on a request. Jay just holds his drink and laughs, telling her that's not why he's there. But then she leans in with a huge blush and says she actually just came there to see him. Jay loses it and does a total spit take, and while Felix is over there shaking with a crushed look on her face, Aich starts laughing and teasing Jay about how he managed to reel in a young noble lady. Felix turns her back on everyone, pouting and acting like she couldn't care less who Jay decides to get close with. But moving on, Nenah finally looks over and sees who Jay is sitting with. She looks totally surprised and calls out to Felix, calling her big sister, which leaves Felix looking completely cornered and sweating as she realizes her cover is blown. Felix lets out a high-pitched cry as Nenah realizes who she is. Nenah admits she didn't even recognize her friend in that adventurer gear, and Nenah explains they used to see each other all the time at parties and vacation villas. Jay mentions they seem like they're actually close, and Nenah tells Felix she was so worried when she heard about what happened to the Ironed family. She's just happy her friend is safe, while the butler nods along at the crazy coincidence of them meeting. Felix asks if Nenah is staying in the capital for now, and after Nenah says she is, Aisha gets these huge stars in her eyes, thinking about how this drama is about to get way more interesting. Jay just stands there awkwardly scratching his head while the girls catch up. Moving on, Felix walks back over and Jay asks if her family really had a villa. She tells him they only had the one, but she's more curious if that guy was Nenah's butler. Jay wonders if that butler has something to do with her villa or the party they're having, and Nenah pulls Jay aside to mention that her butler actually has something important he wants to talk to him about. While Nenah is in the back crying about her ruined victory party, Jay explains they're meeting the butler later since it's for a job, leaving Felix standing there totally red in the face. Felix takes a look at the paper while Jay explains that this is the official request form the butler handed over, and she absolutely loses it when she reads that her family's old villa has been turned into a hideout for bandits. Jay tells her it actually makes sense after the orc mess. Since she couldn't pay the staff, they all just quit, leaving the whole place as a nice empty house that's just been sitting there totally abandoned. The butler explains that Nenah would be pretty upset if she knew a place with so many memories was being trashed, so he's already got 2 warning letters ready. He admits the squatters will probably just rip them up, but they have to follow the right steps for the sake of appearances, so he asks Jay to head over there and handle the forced eviction of whoever is inside. Felix slams her hands on the table looking completely pissed off. She hates the idea of people just living there and asks if she can join the mission. Jay says he'd actually appreciate the help since it's her family's place anyway. Moving on, the forest in the Verheil region is a quiet spot northwest of the capital where nobles usually go to get away, and it's full of villas just like hers. Felix thinks back to when she was just a kid. That's when she first met Nenah and they started playing together, and after that, they'd see each other at every dinner party and just talk until they became the best of friends. Back in the present, Felix admits she was so drunk she can't remember most of it, but Jay mentions they were actually arguing pretty hard, making her freak out about being rude. The two of them head out, riding on Q's back as they fly over the thick forest toward the old estate. They finally reach the villa, and Jay notices right away that the place totally looks like a spot bandits would pick for a hideout. Felix is completely grossed out by the smell, calling it a total trash hole, while Jay knocks on the door and calls out to see if anyone is inside. Someone peeks through the upstairs curtains to see who's there, and then the front doors slowly start to creak open. A rough-looking guy with an eye patch stands there. He looks pretty annoyed and demands to know who they are. Felix thinks he's the most typical bandit she's ever seen, and when he asks why they're at his house, Jay corrects him by saying it's the Ironed Villa. The guy says he doesn't know anything about that, but Jay holds up the official notice and says he's there to deliver an eviction warning from the actual owners. The bandit just scoffs at the whole idea of a warning letter, acting like it's a joke. He gets right in their faces and makes it clear that he thinks the house is his, and nobody is changing his mind, making Felix start losing her cool as she asks if the guy is actually deaf. Jay stays perfectly calm and doesn't even acknowledge the guy's attitude. He just holds out the paper and asks for a signature to confirm the delivery. But the guy just starts laughing like a maniac, completely blowing them off. He makes a disgusting joke, asking if they'd rather have a piece of his snot instead of a signature, just to show how little he cares as things start getting tense and the bandit's hands begin to glow with heat. One of his buddies looks on, asking what he's planning to do with the two visitors standing at the door. And then the rest of the gang starts crowding around while one of them notices Felix standing there. The leader explains that these two are trying to evict them, and then he just rips the notice to shreds right in front of them. But Jay doesn't even blink when the paper gets destroyed. He just stares the guy down and asks for the signature again. And Felix realizes that Jay totally knew the guy was going to rip it up, and the bandit leader tells them they better get lost before they end up getting hurt. He gets a creepy look on his face and adds that they should probably leave the girl behind when they go, and then the whole group starts laughing and mocking Jay, telling him to hurry up and run back home. They call him Mr. Delivery Man, like it's a joke, making it clear they aren't taking him seriously at all. So the leader gets right in Jay's personal space, looking down at him with a nasty grin. He gives him one last warning, telling him to get lost before things get ugly, but Jay doesn't back down an inch even with the guy in his face. He just looks at him and asks if he's actually bothered to wash that dirty neck of his, essentially picking a fight right then and there. The bandit leader lets out a confused sound, not really getting why the vibe just shifted. Jay stares him down and tells him he doesn't need the signature anymore. He's officially done playing nice as he tells the group that their heads will be a good enough substitute for the delivery confirmation. Felix stands right behind him with a look that says she's been waiting for this, and Jay isn't blinking even for a second while the bandit leader hides a nasty grin behind his sword. He can't believe a random delivery guy has the guts to talk to him like that, and he says he's done being underestimated by a nobody. So the rest of the thugs start losing it, cheering for their boss to wreck Jay. They start talking trash, saying they should kill the guy and keep the girl for themselves, and one creep even jokes about being next in line once the boss is done with her. Felix is absolutely fuming as she looks around the room. She can't stand the fact that these guys are tracking dirt all over the villa with their nasty feet, and she tells herself she's never going to forgive them for ruining the place. She turns to Jay and tells him she's taking these guys out no matter what anyone says. Jay doesn't try to stop her. He just gives a simple answer and lets her know he's on board with the plan, because he knows they tried the peaceful way and got nowhere. Since the bandits rejected every chance they were given, Jay says it's time to move on to a forced eviction, and he's clearly ready to get his hands dirty. The thugs just start laughing in their faces like it's the funniest thing they've ever heard. They can't believe Jay is talking big, and one of them mocks him by asking if he really thinks just the two of them can take on the whole group. The leader is practically doubling over, saying he hasn't had a laugh like this in ages. He thinks the whole situation is a joke, but while they're all busy acting tough and laughing, things are quiet outside in the woods. Someone calls out for Q, wondering where the little dragon ran off to, but it turns out the dragon is just chilling in the trees, having a weird stare down with a random rabbit. Q suddenly pops out from the bushes, looking like he's ready for a fight, and the timing couldn't be better since the entire group of thugs just freezes up. Their faces go completely pale the second they see a literal dragon standing there. The leader starts sweating, stuttering about how a dragon could even be in a place like this. Jay doesn't let him finish. He just looks him in the eye and tells him he's wrong about everything, and then Q lunges forward with a loud roar, shaking the whole room. Jay stares them down, telling the group he's only going to say this one more time. He sits on the dragon's back with his sword drawn, looking totally calm. He gives them a final choice, saying if they're actually planning on running, they better do it right now. The leader starts losing it. He's screaming at Jay to stop acting so high and mighty. His guys try to back him up, claiming Jay is just acting tough because of his pet, but their confidence disappears when a massive wall of fire blasts through the room, catching them all off guard. Felix stands in the back, totally stunned by how fast things just escalated into chaos. She looks over at Jay, asking if they're really going to go this hard on them. Jay doesn't miss a beat. He tells her it's exactly what they need and to keep the pressure on. Felix gets a competitive look on her face and says she's on it. She starts gathering even more magic in her hands while the bandits realize they're in way over their heads. The thugs are still trying to talk big, yelling about killing them both, but Jay just ignores the noise and steps forward, ready to finish the job once and for all. Jay dives straight out of the sky on Q's back, aiming his bow at the group below, while they're still trying to figure out what's happening, and the bandits on the ground completely lose their minds. One guy starts screaming for them to wait, but Jay isn't slowing down for anything. The spiky-haired guy yells that attacking from the air is a total cheap shot and tells Jay to come down and fight with a sword like a man. So Jay just looks back at them, mocking the idea of thieves wanting a fair fight. He tells them if that's what they really want, he's happy to help. He signals Q to move in closer, and they drop down even faster than before, making the guys on the ground scramble as the dragon crashes right into their defensive line, scattering everyone everywhere. The eye-patch bandit can barely keep up with the movement. You're looking totally stressed as the chaos unfolds right in front of him. Jay stays low on the dragon's back as they zip through the camp, and with one quick move, a bandit's sword gets sent spinning into the air. The leader can only watch as his weapon flies away, yelling out in total shock that he's been disarmed just like that. He points a finger at Jay, demanding to know who he's even dealing with. Meanwhile, the rest of his crew is already running for the exit. Jay introduces himself as a transporter who also happens to be a summoner with a dragon, which just makes the bandit rant even harder about how a summoner shouldn't be that good with a sword or a bow. Jay just watches him, thinking about how the guy does nothing but complain while Felix decides she's seen enough and tells Jay she's going after the rest of the guys who retreated inside. Jay tells her he's got it covered on his end, so she heads off, promising to turn every last one of them into charcoal. It's pretty clear right then that nobody should ever get on her bad side. Jay turns back to the leader and tells him that if they just leave now, they won't have to get hurt any more than they already are. He asks if they're ready to sign the papers, and the bandit starts begging to do it immediately, making Jay realize these guys only care about their own skin. He asks the guy if he even knows how to write, but secretly, Jay is wondering if letting them go is a mistake since they'll probably just do the same thing in a different place. As Jay suggests, using a simple mark if he can't write, the bandit suddenly grins and pulls a hidden knife, yelling that he's got him. The guy lunges forward for a cheap shot, but Jay doesn't even look worried as the blade gets close because a massive fist comes out of nowhere and smashes the bandit right in the face, completely cutting off his attack. The leader collapses while making a pathetic sound, leaving Jay staring at Q and wondering when his dragon got so protective. Q doesn't hold back and bites down right on the bandit's head, leaving Jay standing there completely stunned by the sudden move. Jay has to jump in and pull the dragon away, telling him to spit the guy out before he ruins his appetite or gets a stomachache. The bandit leader is left face down in the dirt, covered in dragon drool, and thinking about how that one hit totally wrecked him. His body just won't listen to him anymore. Jay looks down at the pathetic sight and asks if this guy is seriously supposed to be the boss of a whole gang. Looking over at the villa, Jay notices all the other thugs have already scrambled back inside. He realizes that just killing these guys won't stop the problem since more will just take their place. He starts thinking of a different plan that might actually work if he can pull it off. It turns out there are two ways to handle summon contracts, and Jay starts weighing his options while looking at the defeated leader. The first way is an internal contract like the one he has with Q, where the beast's power matches the summoner's own skill. But the second way is an external contract, which involves making a deal with a monster or beast that's standing right in front of you. Jay figures it's at least worth a try, so he reaches out his hand to see if he can make this crazy idea work. A bright magic circle starts glowing with intense light as Jay initiates the process. He focuses his energy to bind the logic of the world, declaring that he's making a contract right here. He places his glowing hand directly on the bandit leader's back. The guy feels something weird happening and lets out a confused sound, just before a massive pillar of light explodes around him. He lets out a shocked yell as the magic completely takes over his body. After the light fades, the bandit leader sits up slowly, looking dazed and totally out of it. He rubs his face, asking what just happened and wondering what that strange voice was that he heard inside his head. He looks down at his hands, mentioning how it felt like he was being bound by some invisible force. Surprisingly, he admits the feeling wasn't actually that bad, though Felix thinks the whole thing was honestly pretty gross to watch. Jay decides he's seen enough and tells Q to head back for now, and the dragon vanishes into thin air. Jay just stands there looking exhausted by the absolute mess of a day. It turns out Jay actually went through with it. He ended up making a contract with that gross bandit leader to be his new summoned beast. Jay stands there looking pretty drained while thinking about how these contracts work. Apparently, you can force one if the target's spirit is totally broken, and he's surprised his little experiment actually paid off. He'd honestly given up on summoning anything besides his lizard and spent his time fighting with a sword or bow instead. He never even planned on adding to the team, so he starts wondering if this guy even counts as a summon. Felix thinks it's hilarious that Q finally has a junior to boss around, and she jokingly tells the bandit to take a hike as Jay triggers the summoning magic. A bright circle forms over the bandit's head, and he's suddenly surrounded by a massive pillar of light that pulls him in. Seeing a dirty, middle-aged guy pop out of the magic really kills Jay's mood, especially when the bandit starts rubbing his head and asking what the hell just happened to his body. Jay realizes the guy doesn't seem to remember anything from while he was put away, so he figures it's a good time for introductions and tells the guy his name is Jay Steldom. The bandit points to himself with a smug grin. He says his name is Vincent and tells Jay he's the one in charge now. Felix can't believe a guy like him has such a fancy name, and Jay agrees it doesn't really fit him at all. He asks if he can just call him Vin instead, and the guy just laughs, telling Jay to call him whatever he wants. It's pretty clear the contract is working, because even though he was just screaming and causing a scene, he's suddenly totally fine with following Jay's lead. Jay tells Vincent to go ahead and get all his guys together outside while he thinks about how summoning magic actually works. It's basically just using mana to call out a servant, and Vincent is, actually a huge bargain compared to Q. Jay realizes keeping Vincent out uses way less mana than the little dragon ever did, meaning he can keep the guy active for a long time without breaking a sweat. Vincent starts yelling for the girl to wait up, but Felix is already at her limit and snaps back that she doesn't have to listen to a word those idiots have to say. She lets loose with a massive explosion, screaming for them to turn to dust, while Jay just watches the chaos thinking things are getting way out of hand. He stands there for a second and realizes he can't feel Vincent's presence anymore. The guy just completely vanished. Felix looks like she's still in the zone, looking totally terrifying, and Jay knows he has to stop this battle junkie before she burns the whole place to the ground. He grabs her and tells her to relax because the fight is already over, but she's still breathing hard and clearly isn't finished yet. Jay looks over at the charred, smoking pile on the floor and starts wondering if his new summon is actually dead. He hasn't really tried this before, but he figures he can probably fix this by pouring a fresh batch of mana into the body. A bright light starts glowing over the remains as he tries to bring him back. Vincent suddenly snaps back to life, gasping for air as his body reforms from the light. Looking totally lost, he asks what the hell happened to him, but Jay just tells him to stay cool since he only got a little burned by some magic. Vincent suddenly remembers he has a job to do and yells for his crew to get outside, while Jay wonders if people just forget everything that happens right before they die. Felix watches the bandit leader follow orders and asks Jay how he got such a scary guy to be so obedient. Jay admits the whole situation is pretty weird, explaining that he just tried out a summoning spell on a whim, and it actually worked. Felix tells him he has zero taste in summons, making Jay wish he'd ended up with a cute monster or a beautiful girl instead of a rough bandit. Vincent waves his hand and tells the massive crowd of thugs that everyone is finally together. So, Jay steps up and breaks the news to the group, telling them their leader is now his personal summon. Vincent keeps it simple and says they've got a master-servant contract now, leaving, the entire gang of thugs standing there in total shock. The crowd starts buzzing, and while Jay feels a bit bad because even he doesn't fully get it, the thugs lose their minds and start screaming at him for messing with their boss. Vincent looks the crowd in the eye and backs Jay up, telling his men that everything the kid just said is the real deal. He keeps it blunt, telling the guys that if any of them have a problem with the new setup, they're free to just walk away right now. Jay adds to that, promising he won't hunt them down, force them back, or even call the guards on them if they decide to leave. Standing tall with Felix and Vincent by his side, Jay looks out at the group and officially tells them they are all free men. The crowd stands there in complete silence for a second as the news sinks in. Suddenly, the thugs start losing it, cheering that they'd never leave their boss, and since Vincent respects Jay, they're all in on following him too. Felix is actually pretty shocked by the reaction, realizing that the scary bandit leader is way more popular and trusted by his crew than she thought. Jay gets serious and tells them he's putting them to work, but he promises to take care of their food, clothes, and housing as long as they do a good job. The guys are hyped, so Jay turns to Felix and asks what she wants their new help to handle first. She says she already knows exactly what they should do. Felix looks over the wreckage and says, the villa is a complete mess and needs a deep clean, even if she's mostly the one who broke everything. Vincent rallies the guys and tells them they're actually doing this, which gets the whole crew fired up and shouting. Jay starts planning the next steps, saying they need to get potions to the injured and find a proper place for everyone to stay. Felix points out there's a servant's house right on the villa grounds that's a bit old, but plenty big enough for the whole group. She looks at Jay with a soft expression, telling him he's surprisingly kind for caring so much about a group of bandits. Jay just shrugs it off, saying he doesn't think anyone actually chooses to become a bandit because they want to. He explains that if people have steady food and a roof over their heads, they won't turn to crime, and now they're finally out of the villa. Standing together and watching the crew work, Jay says it looks like the job is officially finished. Later on, back at the estate, Nenah realizes the butler was just following her father's orders by keeping her in the dark about Jay. She gets all worked up and tells the butler it's totally unfair he met Jay first, while Felix realizes they just got caught on the way in. Nenah looks at Jay and asks for confirmation if he really decided to let all those former bandits live right there on the property.